Hey guys, I'm Yuruzi. Part 2 of What If Naruto Was the Red Flash. Naruto finds out about Uzumaki clan when he was 4 years old. Naruto swears to rebuild the home of his clan and finds all the family he has left. Don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 9, A Father. Kyubi looked at the little brat after he answered why he was still here. He grew angry and started releasing Ki at the brat. The effect was immediate. The brat fell on his knees, finding it very hard to breathe. He was sweating heavily, he growled, and his growl was heard throughout the whole room. Why do you think I would want to be your friend, brat? Kyubi asked furiously, showing his teeth to the brat. The little boy was panting. It took a whole minute for the brat to catch his breath and slowly stood on his legs, finding it hard to even stand on his legs. Naruto eyed the Kyubi. He took a huge breath and, to Kyubi's surprise, took a step forward and looked at his eyes sadly. It hurts, doesn't it? The brat whispered, but Kyubi heard him. He narrowed his eyes, showing his teeth again, and he released a furious sigh. What are you saying, brat? He asked with a firm tone and showing power in his voice. The water on the floor looked to be shaking because of his voice and power. He was still leaking a small amount of Ki, which made the brat start sweating from his face. Sadness suddenly took over Naruto's face. It hurts. It hurts to have no one you can call friends or family. To be surrounded by hatred your whole life. I have Toad, Gigi and Hokage Gigi, but still, I know how it feels to be hated and alone, the brat yelled with a sad tone as a tear was rolling down his cheek and fallen on the wet floor. His chest was high, and looking directly at Kyubi's eyes. Kyubi wanted to say something to the brat. But the words had stuck on his throat. His throat felt dry. He knew the brat had a point. His father had told them to help the humans. But they all wanted nothing else but power. Just power to destroy everything else. Their greed was endless and wanting nothing else but more and more power. That's why their wars never ended. They kept killing each other and would continue to do so for the rest of the days. Or until they all die. Kyubi remembered his father very well and always felt longing and sadness when he recognized him, the only one to see them as creatures with souls and feelings. And not as tools to be used for nothing else but power. Kyubi looked at the kid again, his blue eyes like ocean looking at his very soul. Almost like he was judging him. I know none of us wants this, I didn't want you to be sealed inside me and I'm sure you would want the same. But I know that you're not just a creature of hatred. You have feelings like everyone else, so yes, I want to be your friend. Naruto finished with a grin, and that reminded Kyubi of both Kushina and Mito Uzumaki. He was sealed in both of them, but they didn't want his power. They never tried to control him, that was something Kyubi respected in the Uzumaki clan. They were peaceful people. Kyubi couldn't remember the last time he felt anger and little happiness at the same time. He felt angry because he hated humans and happy because the kid in front of him looked at him for a living creature. He could feel Naruto meant what he was saying and not just saying empty words like almost everyone else. Kyubi stood up on his fours and strolled to the end of his cell. His whole figure was visible, and Naruto looked surprised to see how large he was. Now he understood why people said a single tail of the Kyubi was strong enough to destroy a mountain. Kyubi looked down at the brat. He knew himself that the brat had suffered. Hell, he even remembered bad things that not even Naruto could remember that ever happened. Before, it just reassured him that humans were the real monsters and not them. To hurt a child and smile like you just did something incredible. Kurama looked at Naruto's figure, evaluating him. So far, he thought of Naruto as a smart kid with a cool head on his shoulder. Father, you said we should help the humans. I will give this brat a chance, Kyubi thought with a sad smile on his face, remembering him much to Naruto's surprise. Naruto was still looking up at Kyubi. He could feel and see different emotions flashing through his red eyes. To him, it reminded him of Toad Gigi when he said goodbye to him. The Kyubi suddenly sighed loudly. Very well, kid. From now on we are friends, Kyubi said with a bit of a smile on his face, resting his head on his paws. Naruto smiled, and his face brightened like a candle. He put his fist up. Yes, he yelled at the top of his lungs with closed eyes. Naruto opened them to look at Kyubi again. What's your name, Kyubi-sama? Naruto asked, still showing respect in his voice. Kyubi smirked at the way he called him and gave him a confused look. Naruto noticed his confused look. You have a name, right? I mean, Kyubi just means nine tails, he added as his smile looked up to brighten up the large room. The water on the floor looked calm. Kurama was surprised that Naruto knew he must have a name and that Kyubi is not his name. He could also feel the positive energy coming from the brat, which confused him. It felt different but familiar at the same time. The energy, the calmness coming from Naruto reminded Kurama of Hashirama Senju and Mito Uzumaki. He wondered if the brat had any connection with them, but the only connection he might have with them was through his mother and father. As far as he knew, he was an orphan that no one knew who his parents were. Kurama only knew what Kushina knew. He shrugged his shoulders slightly and decided to think about it later. He focused on the kid again. My name is Kurama, Kit, Kurama replied, looking down at Naruto. Naruto smiled that he knew his name, but at the same time, he knew Kyubi wouldn't just tell his name to anyone. He raised his head. Well, Kurama-san. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, is nice meeting you, he introduced himself with an open hand on his chest. Kurama chuckles at his childlike behavior. He thought that it would be less horrible to have someone to talk to, and perhaps with time. Well, since we're friends, I want you to walk close to the bars and remove a bit from the seal, a fingernail would be enough, he requested. Naruto looked confused and raised an eyebrow at his request but just decided to do it. He slowly walked to the bars, and water raised him to the seal. He glanced at Kyubi before putting his finger at the top of the seal. He was about to remove a bit when he suddenly felt a presence inside the big room. Suddenly his hand was grabbed, and he was thrown down on the floor. Naruto didn't know who this was but could feel this one was strong. He looked up to see blue eyes like his staring at him. At first, he didn't understand who this person was and how was he here, but then he went to his hair and face. Naruto felt himself freeze when he understood who he was looking at. The long yellow spiky hair reached his shoulders, blue eyes like his, and the white coat with fire painting at the bottom and the word Yondaime, 4th Hokage, written. His mouth opened and closed, not knowing what to say or even think. He looked at his hand reaching down at him. His small hand slowly grabbed his big one, and the Yondaime helped him up. He was still speechless. He wanted to say something, but all the words had stuck on his throat. Naruto smiled at seeing his father, but he wondered why was he here and how. Yondaime. I'm surprised to see you here, Kurama said with a hint of anger in his tone as he showed his teeth at the Hokage and released a small amount of his ki. The fourth turned to look at the Kyubi, surprised. He expected him to be much harsher towards him. But he was still confused and concerned at the same time. He made this to help Naruto if he ever lost control but looked down at him. He could see that Naruto hadn't lost control, so why was he trying to remove the seal? Minato hoped to God that Kyubi wasn't manipulating Naruto to free him. Finally finding his voice. Dad? Naruto asked tentatively. His eyes showed confusion but longing at the same time. His voice was as low as a small whisper. Looking at him now, Naruto felt that this wasn't the first time he had seen him in person. He just couldn't put a finger where he had seen him before. The 4th Hokage smiled at Naruto, the same smile he had seen from his Tojiji and Hokage-jiji. A smile of love, but Naruto could feel concern coming from the 4th. Yes, Naruto. I'm your father. He finally spoke to his son and walked closer and kneeled in front of him, and gave him a big hug. Naruto felt confused at first, but then he felt hot tears in his eyes, as his hands were trembling like a leaf, his mouth felt dry. Where have you been all this time, Two-chan? Naruto finally asked, and his tears rolled down his cheek. He hugged his father tightly, afraid that he would disappear at any moment. The 4th felt his heart break hearing his words and his son crying his heart out against his shoulder. Minato kissed his cheek and messed his hair that reminded him so much of Kushi-chan. Minato slowly pulled away and gave his son a good look, his blue eyes like his, but unmistakable red hair. He would recognize that hair everywhere. You have grown, Naruto-chan, you have become a man, Minato said, touching his nose with his making Naruto laugh. To Naruto, it felt good to have someone to call Two-chan finally. He was sure this was a dream. He would soon wake up in the orphanage in the cold bed alone like always, having no one around to talk to. Where have you been all this time, Two-chan? Why did you and Ka-chan have to leave me alone? Do you know how much I missed you both? How much I wanted to have someone call Two-chan and Ka-chan and he stopped talking and couldn't stop crying. Naruto wasn't sure if he was happy or angry to see him. Minato gave his son a sad smile and put a hand on his head. I know we left you alone, and there's no excuse for that. A parent's job is to always be there for his children, he said with sadness, knowing from Naruto's voice that he was hurt. His son said nothing to that and just kept clearing away tears from his face with his hand. Tell me, Naruto, do you not live with anyone? Minato asked, and not wanting to receive the answer, he knew he would. He hoped that Shikaku or Jiraiya-sensei was raising him. After a few moments of silence, Naruto shook his head, not knowing what to say. His head down and looking at the floor. Minato felt like another stab in the heart. He was about to ask again. Hokage Gigi visits me once a month in the orphanage. Tojiji was with me for a week but left 3 months ago because of work, his son said with a sad tone. His voice was small and fragile. Minato felt a hint of happiness that his sensei had at least visited Naruto and not forgotten about him and left him alone. He would want him to raise Naruto, but Minato wondered where Tsunade was. Naruto, what about Tsunade? Is she not with you? He asked, confused and leaning his head closer. Naruto looked up at his father in confusion. Why was his father mentioning Tojiji's teammate? She's not with me, he replied curiously, and thinking if he could have someone else to call fall family. Minato sighed sadly. She's your godmother. I don't know why she isn't with you, he replied sadly, thinking of a reason why Tsunade would not stay to take care of Naruto. Perhaps she was too heartbroken. She was a good friend with Kushi, and Minato found it suspicious that she would not stay to raise Naruto. He decided to put that thought away. For now, there was something else he needed to ask, and he knew he didn't have that long. Naruto, tell me, why were you trying to remove the seal? He asked kindly, but Naruto could hear the seriousness in his tone. He was about to reply when Kurama spoke. Yondaime, he spoke with a firm tone and with a slight hint of anger still in his voice, grabbing everyone's attention. Minato turned back to look at Kyuubi, and Naruto's eyes went to Kurama. I wanted to be able to talk to Naruto, that's why I told him to remove a small part of the seal, Kurama answered, glaring daggers at the fourth. Naruto could tell that Kurama wasn't a big fan of his father. He saw his father glaring at Kurama, not trusting a word. But he quickly walked between him and Kurama, grabbing his attention. Minato looked surprised to see Naruto do that, and Kurama was even more so. Kurama is my friend Two-chan, Naruto spoke with a high tone and firm, leaving no place for arguments. Minato's eyes widened slightly. Kurama smiled at the brat and nodded his head at the Hokage, confirming what Naruto said was true. Minato was about to say something when he saw his body slowly disappearing. Naruto immediately alerted and ran at his father. Two-chan, he screamed and hugged him. Naruto! I will be leaving now, but remember that I love you with all my heart and I'm proud of you. Hiruzen has a few techniques that belong to you. Time will come when you meet your mother too, and be happy, he said with care and love in his tone. His hand slipped through Naruto's shoulder. Still hugging him, Naruto nodded his head. Yes, Two-chan, and don't worry, I'm studying. I will become better than you. I have friends, and will have a family one day, he promised as Minato disappeared with a smile on his face, leaving Naruto looking at the place where Minato was. Silence took over the large room, and Kurama was growing concerned. He noticed the water on the floor was having small waves. And the temperature seemed to lower and felt cold. Naruto, he asked, concerned. Naruto slowly turned to Kurama. He raised his head and looked at the furball with a smile that he had never had before. The sadness was gone, and his face was as bright as the sun. I'm fine, Kurama, he said as the warm feeling and the positive energy could be felt again by Kurama, confusing him again. What is this? Why am I having this feeling? Kurama asked himself. After a few moments, Naruto remembered he still needed to remove a bit from the seal. Naruto walked back to the bars and removed a small part of the seal. He could feel Kurama's chakra around, and it was dense and more than before. Suddenly Naruto disappeared from the mindscape. Kurama knew the time for him to wake up had come. He couldn't help but smile. Perhaps this one isn't worthless, Kurama thought, and decided to rest. Well, father, I'm doing what you told us to, Kurama thought with a smile on his face. Secret place. In a large room, Danzo was sitting on a chair and waiting for reporters. Soon an Umbu kneeled before him. Report, Danzo ordered his weapon with an emotionless tone. The Umbu kept his head down and started talking. I'm sorry to inform you, Danzo-sama, but both plans have failed, he informed, and Danzo gritted his teeth in frustration. His grip tightened around the chair. The Kyuubi brat was followed by the 3 shinobis, but the demon used chakra chains to tie them and kill one of them. Giving the third enough time to go to him, he said, emotionless and still keeping his head down. Hearing the answer, Danzo was intrigued. Perhaps having the Kyuubi wasn't the only useful thing his future weapon had in store. He put his finger on his chin. What about the girl and her mother? He asked, since it had been some time since his squad reported back. Nothing, Danzo-sama, no news. Should we send Umbu to check? He asked, his voice still emotionless. Danzo thought but decided against it. If his squad of 20 weapons had fallen, then maybe he had underestimated the Uzumaki. He shook his head in denial and made a sign with his hand for him to go away. The Umbu left, leaving Danzo alone in his thoughts. I should try again, and once that is done, winning his loyalty will be easy, Danzo thought with a slight smirk on his face, and decided to visit his old friend. Chapter 10, The Truth. Naruto. His eyes slowly opened. Naruto could only see white. First, his eyes then went to the window close to his bed. The sun was shining high in the sky, and the trees and grass shone with life. Relaxed Naruto. His muscles around his hands were hurting. He moved his hands slowly, trying to get up. Only then did Naruto notice Hokage Gigi sleeping in a chair close to his bed. His body was resting on the chair, and his head was on the edge of the bed. Naruto slowly smiled that his Gigi had stayed for him. He now understood where he was. I'm in hospital. Was all that a dream? Naruto asked himself, and hoping that it wasn't. It was no dream. Brat Kurama's voice was suddenly heard. Kurama, is that you? Wow. Is good to know that wasn't a dream, Naruto replied, smiling, but his voice was heard throughout the room. Don't talk out loud, idiot, just think of what you want to say, and I will hear you, Kurama immediately replied, and shaking his head in Naruto's stupidity. Naruto understood and mentally nodded his head at the giant fox. His mind then remembered his father being the 4th Hokage and his mother being of the Uzumaki clan. He wondered why wouldn't his Gigi and Toji tell him. Maybe I'm still too young, I shouldn't know, Naruto thought, scratching his cheek. His movements around the bed made the old Hokage slowly open his eyes. When he saw Naruto was awake, his face smiled, and he went to hug him. Naruto felt happy and hugged him back, but still had questions on his mind. He slowly pulled away. Naruto, my boy, how are you? The 3rd Hokage asked, still concerned. Naruto nodded his head that he was alright, but the 3rd could see something was bothering him. He sighed and looked at Naruto's eyes. Tell me what's wrong? He asked, his voice low. Naruto looked at his tiny hands almost in shame. He slowly lowered his head. He could remember that he killed the shinobi. Naruto still could remember his blood coming out of his chest and mouth. Him in the ground, trying to breathe and moving his body around. His life slowly left his body. Naruto felt his hands slowly shaking at the memory. I killed him, he stuttered slowly, his voice low as a whisper, his voice fragile almost like broken glass. The 3rd understood and put his hand on Naruto's chin. He slowly raised his head to look at his Gigi. He expected his Gigi to be angry at him, maybe calling him like everyone else a demon, but he did none of that. Naruto could feel and see the sadness in Gigi's face and sorrow. I'm sorry you had to do that, Naruto, but you shouldn't think of yourself as a monster or anything because you protected yourself. I'm not angry at you and never would be. Listen, in the shinobi world, killing is part of the job. But we do that to help people. To help the people we love, the old Hokage said, his voice speaking of experience. He would have waited to explain this to Naruto when he was much older. Naruto's face brightened up, his blue eyes looked to be shining again. He said nothing as his eyes looked at the trees outside the window. Silence took over the room. Naruto thought about what his Gigi said. Naruto slowly stood up from the bed and walked to the window. He opened it and let the fresh air come inside. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. He felt at peace, the birds singing outside, the leaves sound as the wind moved to pass them. The wind hit his face. He opened his eyes again and turned back to see his Gigi in the chair smiling at him. Naruto decided to talk to his Gigi about his parents and Kurama. Gigi, I would like to talk something important to you, he said, his voice suddenly serious. The 3rd nodded his head to continue, but Naruto could feel the 2 Umbu in the room. Both of them were familiar, but he still didn't know if he could trust them with the knowledge of his parents and Kurama. Can you tell your Umbu to leave? Naruto asked, his voice low. If the old Hokage was surprised that Naruto knew about the ANBU, he didn't show it. The old Kage made a sign with his hand, and the Umbu left immediately. Naruto couldn't feel anyone else and walked back to the bed. He sat, and his eyes went to the old Kage. I know about the Kyuubi and my parents, he said. His Gigi just looked at him for a few moments without saying anything, almost like he didn't understand what he said. The old Hokage sighed sadly. How do you know? He asked, but had a few thoughts of how he knew. The old Kage could see Naruto was bright, and keeping the secret of Kyuubi would be hard to keep. The idiots of the Hidden Leaf made sure to let Naruto know that he wasn't like everyone else. I met Kyuubi, he told me about my father being the fourth Hokage and my mother is Kushina Uzumaki, Naruto replied, his eyes sharp as steel and looking at the old Kage. He didn't mention the name of Kyuubi, he would say the name if he had his permission. The old Kage's face changed immediately. His eyes widened, he felt his heart pounded, fear filled his whole body. He quickly put his hands on Naruto's shoulders. Naruto, don't trust the Kyuubi, he will try to manipulate you, he quickly said. His eyes were looking at him, almost begging him. Naruto quickly shook his shoulders. No, Kyuubi is not like that, Gigi, he was forced to attack the village, Naruto shouted, his eyes narrowed and his chest high. The old Hokage could tell from Naruto's tone he truly believed what he was saying, but at the same time, Kyuubi was not someone to be trusted. He took a deep breath and could feel the temperature lowering, a shiver of coldness went through his body, making him shiver. He sighed and pinched the bridge on his nose. His mind then thought about Kyuubi being forced to attack the village. Naruto, what do you mean Kyuubi was forced to attack? He asked. Hoping not to receive the answer, he knew he would. He said he was forced because of a man with Sharingan, Naruto replied and saw as his Gigi's face lost all color. His face looked as white as a ghost. His hand closed in a fist, and the other held the chair's arm tightly, small cracks started appearing in the arm. Gigi, who could he be? Naruto asked, his voice not that of a child, but of someone furious wanting to know who killed both of his parents and destroyed his life. The old Kage was silent at his question, and he didn't look like he could even hear him, finally finding his voice. I don't know, Naruto, did Kyuubi mention who could be? His Gigi asked, his hands on his chin slightly scratching his chin. I don't know who he was. I have never felt his chakra before, at first I thought that he was Madara but this one's chakra was different, Kurama replied to Naruto, releasing a growl remembering the masked man. Naruto heard him and felt disappointed. He looked at his Gigi and shook his head in denial. The old Kage sighed sadly and decided to think later about it. Naruto, about your parents, I wanted to wait until you grow up, your father had many enemies. If you spit it out accidentally, IWA would stop at nothing to kill you, the third said, feeling bad that he kept the truth from Naruto. He knew he had more rights to know that more than anyone else. Of course, Naruto felt angry, and he had the right to know more than anyone else. He listened to his answer and thought about it, and he remembered to have read that his father alone was able to defeat 2,000 men from the hidden village of stone with his jutsu, the flying Rajan god. He knew what he said was true. He was only a 4-year-old, and he knew his Gigi would tell him when he thought he was ready for the truth. He sighed and smiled at Gigi, which he shared, filling his heart with happiness. I understand, Gigi, he replied, smiling. A sudden thought struck Hiruzen, and he had to resist the urge to smack his forehead for what he was about to do. Why didn't I ask this earlier? Damn the forgetfulness that comes with this age. Naruto-kun, why weren't you at your room in the orphanage yesterday in the evening? He asked slowly, as if afraid to find out the answer to that question. In a mumble that Hiruzen barely understood, the red hair said, the matron kicked me out yesterday evening. Hiruzen suspected that the matron would have deliberately kept Naruto out of the orphanage last night because of the festival but did not expect him to be thrown out of the orphanage. The Kage sighed tiredly of this and the stupid villagers. Naruto, how about ramen? He asked, knowing how much the little redhead liked ramen just like a certain redhead he knew before. Naruto's face brightened up at the mention of ramen. He quickly jumped from the bed and ran to the door. Sarutobi laughed at his behavior and stood up and followed him behind. Soon they reached the Ichiraka ramen. Naruto first arrived in front of it, his smile not leaving his face as he waited for his Gigi to arrive. The old Kage couldn't help but smile at the energy Naruto had. Wait for me, Naruto-kun. I'm not as young as you and these old bones aren't getting any younger, he replied and soon reached the restaurant. Walking inside, Naruto jumped at the chair, and his eyes looked at Teuchi. The man smiled seeing his favorite customers but quickly bowed his head in respect of seeing the Hokage. Hokage-sama, is good to see you again and the same for you, Naruto-kun, he said. Thank you for the warm welcome. I want a bowl with ramen, and for NR I want 10 bowls with ramen and extra meat please, the redhead interrupted. Tucci laughed at the little kid and started making their ramen. Naruto clenched his hands together behind his head, his legs moving around, not being able to wait for his favorite food. Finally, the food came, he picked up his chopsticks and started eating. Naruto ate the meat and the egg and drank the whole ramen in one go. After 10 more bowls, Naruto slowed down and was eating at a slower pace. While he was eating, Naruto stopped and turned his head to his Gigi. What does it mean to be a shinobi? Sarutobi looked surprised by his question, his eyes widened slightly. He looked at Naruto's eyes almost like he was searching for something. To be a shinobi means to endure. A shinobi can follow or lead others into any darkness and work together to overcome that darkness and make it out the other side. A shinobi walks towards danger when everyone else is running away. That is because a shinobi must look at any foe and simply say, "Bring it on." That is because shinobi exist to protect those who can't protect themselves. Naruto had a look of wonder on his face. He had no idea Gigi was that wise. Sarutobi looked at Naruto and mentally smiled. He knew about Naruto's treatment by the villagers. He mused that perhaps I could give him a little insight into what being a Hokage means. Naruto recovered from his wonder and stared at his half-full bowl, deep in thought. If this is what being a shinobi meant, he had a pretty good idea of what being a Hokage meant. He was snapped out of his thoughts when Gigi said, "Now that that answer is out of the way, I can tell you what being a Hokage." "I know Gigi." Those words stopped Hiruzen in his tracks, his head tilting in curiosity. "You know what, Naruto-kun?" Naruto looked up, understanding and respect in his eyes. Hiruzen was touched at the respect he was receiving from Naruto, but his curiosity was increasing. What being a Hokage means? Hiruzen stared at him, silently asking him to continue. Naruto spoke up, "The Hokage is responsible for everything in this village. It's his responsibility to protect everyone here and to make sure they are safe and happy with their village. He tends to the finances of this village, the rules, the daily events, everything. He controls every single ninja who bears a leaf headband and basically directs when they live and die. This job is not for the faint of heart, and only for someone who loves this village deeply." At the end of his answer, he was staring back at his bowl. Hiruzen was shocked at the understanding Naruto showed of the position of Hokage. He had no idea that Naruto was this wise and knowledgeable. Tucci and Ayam had stopped working as well, staring at the redhead with wide eyes along with the Hokage. It was simply unheard of, a 4-year-old showing such a deep understanding of something most people don't understand until much later in life. Some never understood in their life. Hiruzen was shocked so much that he didn't notice his jaw was hanging a bit. Such a deep perception and insight at such a young age, he thought with wonder. Only one person had shown such understanding like this, and he, too, was 3 years older. Itachi Uchiha was a prodigy among the likes of Kakashi Hatake and Minato Namikaze. Naruto looked up when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Gigi was looking at him with a strange expression. "That is exactly what being Hokage means, Naruto-kun." After they ate, Sarutobi paid for the ramen and left the restaurant. Naruto was staying close to Gigi. The old Kage decided to talk with Naruto. He looked at Naruto with a serious look on his face. "Naruto-kun, we have to find a new place for you to live." The words were out of his mouth before he could stop them. "Not another orphanage, Gigi." Hiruzen stared at the desperate look Naruto was giving him. He was scared that one day it would come to this. And surprisingly, he agreed with Naruto. He did not want Naruto to live anywhere he would be hated. Unfortunately, that left only one option. "Naruto-kun, that means you have to live alone," he said, silently wishing he could take the boy in himself. Unfortunately, he could not. The Drat Civilian Council was in his way. Naruto crossed his hands over his chest defensively, not hesitating for a moment to answer, "Better than living in someplace where I am treated like a demon." He was looking at Hiruzen, chin tilted upwards in a way only children could show their stubbornness. "Oh Kushina, his stubbornness reminds me so much of you," he recalled with a sad smile. He knew Naruto would not budge from his point. Sighing, he said, "But are you sure you will be able to take care of yourself? You will have to cook for yourself, bring food for yourself?" He asked, wanting to know if Naruto was fully aware of what it meant to live alone. Naruto didn't care, still keeping his hands crossed over his chest. He just nodded. Sarutobi accepted it and decided to give him an apartment. "Very well, Naruto. I will go now to find a place for you to live. he replied and made a sign with his hand. An Umbu appeared in front of him, waiting for orders. "Spend time with Naruto until I return," he ordered, and a slight smile on his face seeing Kakashi's head perk up at his request. Hiruzen turned to Naruto whose focus was on the Umbu. "See you later Naruto-kun," he said and shunsen away to find an apartment for Naruto and punishment to the orphanage for kicking Naruto out. Naruto was standing in front of the Umbu, not knowing what to say. He knew this one looked after him. "What do you want to do Naruto-kun?" the Umbu asked, smiling behind his mask. Naruto could feel the happiness coming from the Umbu and wondered why it was that. After a few moments, he answered. "Well, can you help me to unlock my chakra, old man?" he asked, seeing his white hair. An annoyed look spread through his whole face at being called old. He was only 19 years old, for crying out loud. "Aw, I'm not that old, kid. Why do you have white hair then?" Naruto asked, pointing the finger at his hair, knowing the Umbu wasn't that old but decided to make a joke. "Follow me. I will help you to unlock your chakra," Kakashi replied, completely ignoring the question. Naruto smiled from ear to ear and followed him. Chapter 11, Chakra Nature. Naruto was holding behind Anbu's back, his hands holding tightly around his neck. They soon reached an expansive training yard. Close to the yard was a lake and a forest. The ground was full of grass. He could see some trees had scratched marks on them. He jumped down from the Anbu's back and looked around. It seemed the perfect place to train. His eyes then went back to the Anbu. "What should I do? And what should I train first?" Naruto asked excitedly, talking fast to the Anbu. The white hair raised his hands. "Hey, calm down. First, you're only 4 years old. Which means too young for physical training. Your bones are still weak and not well built for physical training. That means after you unlock your chakra, you can train your chakra control," he stated, looking down at Naruto. The redhead nodded his head, slightly disappointed, but as long as he could train his Fuinjutsu, he was happy. "Good, now to unlock your chakra, you need to meditate," he said and saw Naruto raise an eyebrow wanting to elaborate. Kakashi couldn't help but be reminded of Minato-sensei when he looked at him like that. For a moment, he thought his sensei would be the one to talk to him, not Naruto. "What then?" he asked, putting his hands behind his head. "Well, when you meditate you will feel this feeling, and you need to pull it towards you," he added, smiling behind his Anbu mask. Naruto nodded his head fast and quickly sat where he thought was alright in a mediating position, holding the fingers of his hands together. Naruto could feel the grass softly touching his legs whenever the wind came around. He closed his eyes and started focusing on finding the feeling the Anbu was telling him. "Don't worry if you can't do it immediately, some can take time to unlock it. Hell, even the likes of Yondaime and Sandaime, third Hokage, it took at least 2 days to unlock," Kakashi said, wanting Naruto not to feel bad if he couldn't do it first try. Naruto kept quiet and just focused on the task at hand. While this was happening, the Anbu pulled out an orange book and started reading. He knew Naruto had his eyes closed, so he wasn't looking and would keep his eyes closed for some time. But he kept an eye on Naruto from time to time to see if he opened his eyes. Naruto felt nothing, and he couldn't feel anything. It felt like he was in a dark room with no one around. The silence was overwhelming. He stretched out his sensor abilities but couldn't feel anything around him. The seal in his stomach slowly started glowing red. If it wasn't for the white jacket that he was wearing, one could see it shining through the thin red shirt underneath the jacket. Naruto kept on meditating and trying to find what the Anbu was talking about. Outside, Kakashi had read many pages of the orange book. He suddenly stopped reading and looked up to see the sun. It has been almost 2 hours since he started, Kakashi thought, and changed the book's page. He glanced above the book to see Naruto with his eyes still closed. Naruto was slowly getting irritated, and he couldn't find anywhere. He tried and spread his sensor abilities as far as possible. When he suddenly felt a presence in the darkroom, he felt it warm and almost like it was calling to him. He tried to grab it, but it felt like it was slipping away. Naruto tried again, but it slipped further away. He started getting frustrated and tried again, but it got further away. Outside, Kakashi saw Naruto slightly opening his eyes and looking sad, his head down and not wanting to look up at him. He slowly approached him and put the book back in his pocket. Naruto still kept his head down in shame. "Now Naruto, don't give me that look, it's normal to not achieve it on the first try," Kakashi said quietly and touched his shoulder in a reassuring manner. Naruto finally looked up at him. "I could feel that feeling but it got away from me." I tried, but the more I tried it got further away, said Naruto with a sad look on his face. The ANBU then did something Naruto didn't expect. He removed his ANBU mask that looked like a dog. Naruto raised an eyebrow when he saw a second mask, wondered why would someone ever wear two masks. His eyes then went to the covered left eye by his ninja emblem and noticed a scar above his left eye that went down to his eye. Naruto wondered if he hid his left eye because he was blind and didn't need to show it to the others. Listen, Naruto, is quite impressive that you could feel it, he said and pointed the finger at his forehead. Try to calm your mind, don't try to get nervous. You need to be as calm as the water over there, Kakashi advised and pointed the finger at the lake. Naruto looked at the lake and stood up on his legs. He slowly walked to the lake, the fresh air around and the wind hitting his face. It was a few hours after midday, the sun was still shining and made everything look brighter. Naruto felt like the grass and trees were brighter when he was close, and he felt relaxed. Kakashi saw Naruto walking to the edge of the lake, but his focus was on the trees and grass near Naruto. It looked like they were more green than before. Naruto took a deep breath and filled his lungs with fresh air, and relaxed. He was trying to feel at peace with everything. Naruto sat down on the grass and started meditating again, and he remembered that he needed to remain calm. He closed his eyes and just relaxed at the sound of trees moving from the wind, grass moving around him. The water in the lake had small waves and a few drops of water wetting his back. Naruto found himself in the darkroom again, his seal started glowing red again, but this time the glowing was much brighter. He felt the feeling inside the darkroom instead of trying to grab it. Naruto did nothing and just kept calm. He waited and waited. At first, nothing happened, but Naruto could feel it getting warmer and closer. It felt warm and almost the same as the water and trees around him. Naruto thought it was getting closer and getting warmer, filling his whole body with warmth. He slowly moved his right hand up and pushed it towards the warm feeling. Naruto slowly approached it, almost afraid that he would scare it away. As he got closer, the feeling didn't disappear and just stood there. He finally felt it and grabbed it with his hand. It didn't slip away. Kakashi was again reading the book, and it had been an hour since Naruto tried for the second time to unlock his chakra. But he was wondering why nature itself looked to be reacting towards Naruto. He decided to ask the third if he knew anything about it. His mind then focused again on his book, wondering when Jiraiya-sama would publish the new Ika Ika book. He hoped to be soon. His hand slowly moved beneath the next page and changed the page. Kakashi was about to start reading the next page when he felt it. He immediately focused his eyes on Naruto and saw as the wind was getting harsher, the tree branches were hitting one another from the strong wind. The water from the lake started having small waves moving towards Naruto. His eyes widened at his chakra. It felt warm, almost like he was in front of a fire but not burning and just having a feeling of calmness and warmness. Naruto, how can you have so much chakra? Kakashi thought, knowing that he had Chunin level of chakra easily. Unknown to them, the feeling from Naruto was spreading around the village. Everyone could feel the calmness and warm feeling from the chakra. Some even fell asleep. Hokage Tower. He was looking at the pages that wrote about suitable apartments for Naruto. He had decided to give Naruto an apartment close to the Nara compound. Shikaku had told him that his son Shikamaru wanted to meet Naruto again, and he saw that as the perfect opportunity for Naruto to have friends and be closer to them. His eyes went to an apartment that looked decent, and he would give the money needed to pay and, of course, extra cash for different things for Naruto. He was reading about the apartment when he felt the chakra. He immediately stood up but didn't feel anything sinister coming from this, no bloodthirsty or evil. Hell, it even made him feel calmer and relaxed. Sarutobi decided to check anyway to see what this was all about. There was never harm from being cautious. Training yard. Kakashi's eyes were wide open. He had revealed his fully matured Sharingan to see clearly. Naruto's chakra was enormous. He knew this amount of chakra was definitely felt through the whole village. He needed to stop him now. Kakashi ran at Naruto, but then suddenly, all the chakra stopped, the wind's speed was average again, and he opened his blue eyes looking at him with a smile that reached his ears, his face as bright as the sun. He quickly stood up and raised his fist in the air. "Yesss, I'm the best," he yelled, but then Naruto felt his vision getting fuzzy and his limbs feeling numb. He fell on his knees but was grabbed by Kakashi before he hit the ground. Naruto was panting, his blue eyes barely opened but his smile not leaving his face, sweat running down his face and his eyes slowly looked at Kakashi. Did I it, he said and lost concussions. Kakashi smiled proudly behind his mask. Yes, you did, Naruto. You're just like your father, he stated proudly and moved Naruto's hand behind his neck to hold him up. He then saw as Hokage-sama came to the training yard looking directly at Naruto. His eyes focused on Kakashi when he understood that Naruto was sleeping peacefully. What happened here? Hokage-sama asked with a firm tone, looking behind Kakashi's shoulder at where Naruto had unlocked his chakra. The grass had grown a bit, and the level of water in the lake had raised as well. The trees looked to be shining with life. He unlocked his chakra, Hokage-sama. I have to say, I'm impressed, Kakashi stated, but inside he was happy that he helped Naruto to do it. Sarutobi thought as much and walked to the place where Naruto stood. His eyes were looking at the grass. He put a hand on his chin and wondered why it would react like that. Too bad that Tsunade is not here, perhaps she could help. Sarutobi thought to himself and wondered if he could somehow get in touch with her. Jiraiya would arrive after 2 months, he hoped he would stay longer this time for Naruto's sake. He sighed sadly and decided to think later about this and turned to look at Kakashi, who was holding a sleeping Naruto in his arms. He noticed that he didn't have his ANBU mask anymore but ignored it. Bring him to my office, when he wakes up I will bring him to his new house, he ordered with a voice as strong as steel. Kakashi nodded and shunts away from the training yard. Mindscape. Naruto slowly opened his eyes, and he immediately felt the familiar chakra of Kurama close to him. He slowly stood up on his little legs to see Kurama sleeping behind the cage like a lazy fox, but what caught Naruto was the ambient around the seal had changed. It didn't look like a sewer anymore, but like a forest, and to his surprise, it looked similar to the woods in the training yard. He had so many questions on his head and turned to the only one who he thought had the answers. Wake up, lazy fox, he screamed, making Kurama open his eyes immediately. When he saw who shouted, he glared and growled at the brat. Why did you wake me up? I was sleeping, Kurama asked, growling and showing his teeth to Naruto. Naruto didn't look intimidated in the slightest, he just shrugged his growls off. You sleep all the time, furball. Hell, I bet most of your life was spent sleeping. I want to know why my mindscape has changed. He asked and pointed his hand to the forest that his mindscape had become. Kurama knew about the forest, and his mind this was better than before. Why would I know that, brat? This is your mind, idiot, and second, this forest is much better than that sewer, he replied, liking the trees and the river close to him. The forest had grown even inside the cage, and near his paws was a small river. Kurama couldn't feel the fresh air and forest smell but still was better than the damn sewer. Naruto nodded since he liked this more than a sewer. Thinking about the seal reminded him of his seal glowing red, and he had noticed in both times when he tried to unlock his chakra, he felt his seal glowing like many other times. Kurama, why does my seal in the stomach glows red sometimes? He asked, hoping the giant lazy fox had answers. Kurama raised an eyebrow at his question. What do you mean? He asked for Naruto to elaborate further on what he was saying. Naruto was surprised to hear his question. I mean, since I remember myself, I could feel sometimes something in my stomach. And many times I saw the seal glowing red like fire, he replied and put a hand on his stomach. I don't know why would that happen. I don't feel any different from your seal to your mother's seal, but maybe you should have asked your father when he was here, Kurama replied and thought what might cause the seal to do that. Naruto smacked his face with his hand for forgetting, he had been so excited to see his father that he completely forgot about the seal. He sighed and decided to forget about it. So far, nothing terrible had happened because of the seal. His mind then went that he was able to unlock his chakra. He felt so powerful when he did it, and he felt chakra all around him when he did. Naruto knew he could always feel things that he wasn't supposed to, but now he thought he felt even more than before. Almost as he could know what he was thinking, Naruto, now that you have unlocked your chakra, I should tell you about the abilities you have because you are my Jinchuriki, Kurama said as he walked closer to the end of the cage and looked directly at Naruto. Naruto nodded his head for him to go on. Kurama raised a claw. Well, first thing you have is the massive amount of chakra, and since you're an Uzumaki, it should be easier for you to use my chakra, but now that since you have this much chakra, you will need to spend a long time training your chakra control, he stated and raised a second claw. Second, your sensing abilities will be much better now. I'm sure you will be able to tell the difference between a clone and a real human even if the user is a professional, he added and raised the third claw. Third, you have KCM mode, Kyubi chakra mode, and Baron mode, but they're not important right now, Kurama stated, and his eyes went to the water. I don't know which are your element affinity, but you should be better at them whichever they are, Kurama finished. Naruto smiled at the different abilities he would have. I appreciate it, but I will use your chakra only if I have your permission, he stated thoughtfully. His hand fist and looking at Kurama. He smiled at the little kid and appreciated that he didn't want to use his chakra without permission. He was thankful that Naruto was indeed like the other Uzumaki. We're friends, Naruto, if you need my chakra you're welcome to use it, Kurama replied, and Naruto smiled again and nodded his head. Thank you Kurama-san, he said, and he suddenly disappeared from his mindscape. You're something different, Uzumaki Naruto, let's see what you do, Kurama thought and rested his head on his paws, and for the first time in a long time. His mind went to his brothers and sisters. Hokage Tower. Naruto opened his eyes and saw himself in a place he had never seen before. He slowly stood up from the couch and saw a desk with the word fire written. In the desk was what he could describe as a giant pile of paperwork. Naruto walked to the window of the office, and he was surprised to see the whole village. Now he understood that he was at the Hokage's tower. Naruto turned around, and his eyes went to the pictures above the desk. Naruto knew immediately who they were. It was the picture of the Shodame, first Hokage, the god of shinobi, Nidame, second Hokage, the greatest water user to have ever existed, third Hokage and his father, the Yellow Flash. Naruto focused his eyes on the picture of his father. He knew they were 4ANBU in the office. Naruto could feel one of them was worried for him. The handle of the door moved. Naruto turned to the door when Jiji walked inside. Hokage smiled when he saw Naruto. It's good to see you well my boy, come with me, his Jiji said kindly. Naruto walked to him, and he put a hand on Naruto's shoulder and shunsin away. Naruto now noticed they were somewhere else, and they were in front of a big house with 4 floors. I really need to know how to do this jutsu, Naruto thought, and thinking that perhaps Tojiji could teach him when he arrives. The house's walls were painted red outside. Naruto could see a few cracks around the wall. The roof was red too. Jiji walked first, and Naruto followed him upstairs. During their walk, Naruto could feel many people around. Some who saw him started having bad intentions. It wasn't his first time, but Naruto still hated their behavior towards him. It is not my fault and is not Kurama's fault, Naruto thought. They soon reached the 4th floor. His Jiji took a key from his pocket and opened the door. Walking inside, Naruto entered what he thought was the restroom, and the room had 3 doors. One had written toilet, the second had written kitchen, and the third bedroom. The house wasn't cold but neither warm. The restroom had an oversized couch that was in a decent state, a big square tablecloth, a TV and a shelf to put books on. Seeing the shelf reminded Naruto of the books he still had left in the orphanage. He looked up at his Jiji, hoping he would help him. Jiji, can you bring the books Tojiji gave me, they're still in the orphanage? Naruto requested with a tiny voice, hoping he could have his books back. The old Hokage immediately nodded his head, gave him a warm smile, and turned to the door. Wait here Naruto-kun, he said, reassuring him and shunsin away, leaving Naruto in his thoughts. He looked around the restroom again and sighed, slightly scratching his cheek. Well, this is our new home Kurama. Chapter 12, Legacy. Naruto, 2 days later. He was lying on his head, and he could hear the clock ticking. It was silence. Naruto had his eyes open and just listening to the clock ticking. It was 9 a.m., and Naruto felt lonely. His Jiji had brought him the books back. The new books his Tojiji had brought him the last time were all about Uzumaki clan. Much to his surprise and Jiji's surprise. He had started reading the first book. There were 3 books overall, and Naruto had done nothing but read the books about his clan. He had learned that his clan came from Uzushiogakure, the land of whirlpools. Naruto was sure that if his homeland still existed, he would have been welcomed there as an Uzumaki. People wouldn't look at him and call him a demon because they couldn't see the difference between the water and the glass holding the water. Naruto thought if there were other Uzumaki out there, he was sure he wasn't the last one left in the world. He didn't know, but one thing he noticed from the books his Tojiji gave him is that none of them mentioned why his clan was destroyed. Were they bad people? Naruto asked himself as the clock was still ticking. Kurama, do you know anything about what kind of people my clan was? Naruto asked, staring at the roof. His little hands behind his head. I don't know exactly what kind of people they were. Your mother and Mito Uzumaki were the only Uzumaki I knew, but from my knowledge, they weren't bad people, the opposite. They were known as good people who wanted peace, But that is a foolish thing to want in a world that only wants more power, Kurama replied with a growl at the end. Naruto listened to his reply and wondered if Tojiji knew anything. He wished to know how his clan was and how their homeland looked like. It had been 2 days since he unlocked his chakra and since he couldn't do physical training yet. He had tried to do level 1 Fuinjutsu. His Jiji gave him wooden kunai or shurikens to seal in scrolls instead of sharp ones. A smile spread on Naruto's face when he remembered it yesterday. Naruto had a blank scroll in front of him. He was sitting in a chair close to a desk. He had a brush and glass filled with black color. The book about Fuinjutsu of level 1 was on the edge of the desk closed. Naruto took a deep breath and picked up the brush, and he slowly started drawing the seal needed to seal a kunai, as he kept drawing slowly. He wanted to make sure he was doing it right. After around 30 minutes of drawing, he finished. Sweat was running down his cheek, his eyes looked focused entirely on the scroll. Naruto took the wooden kunai and put it in the middle of the seal. He channeled his chakra to his hand and completed the seal. Naruto's eyes widened when he saw that the kunai had successfully been sealed. A smile spread through his face, and he raised his fist in the air. "I did it, Datebeo," Naruto shouted. He was able to seal a shuriken as well. He only needed to seal a small sword and food to complete level 1 and pass to level 2. His Jiji was impressed and told him that was much harder than Naruto was making it to be. The ANBU that had helped Naruto told him he could try to stick a leaf on his forehead to train his chakra control. The ANBU had gone on a mission, and Naruto didn't have anyone to help him with chakra control, so he decided to just read about his clan first and train his Fuinjutsu. His mind then returned to what his father told him about the jutsus he had left for him, including Hiroshin and other jutsus. Naruto hoped he had left Uzumaki jutsus as well. Jiji told him he would bring the techniques to him soon. Naruto wanted to know how Hiroshin worked. He found it fascinating. He hoped there were Uzumaki jutsus as well, and he hoped his mother knew any. Naruto put that thought at the back of his head and decided to eat. He slowly stood up from his bed and went to the kitchen. It had enough for him to cook unless I burn the house trying to cook, Naruto thought with a slight chuckle. The kitchen had a large table, different items to use, and a different set of knives. The book his Jiji gave him about cooking was lying on the table. He scratched his cheek softly and walked to the table. Naruto opened the book and started reading through different things he thought he would be able to cook. Later, Naruto sat eating his dinner at his dining table. The cooking book the Hokage had provided was invaluable, allowing him to cook food for himself. He made sure to follow the instructions in the book word for word, and the results were dangerous. While cooking, his oil had almost caught on fire, and his soup had been in hot temperatures for longer than necessary, resulting in his soup tasting sour. After another dangerous try, he was able to cook something decent. He was eternally grateful for what the older man had done for him. Now that he thought about it, he figured that some instructors would be prone to discriminate against him when he entered the academy 2 years later. Perhaps this was the way of an older man looking out for him in his shinobi life, he thought. As he finished his food, Naruto couldn't help but feel the loneliness in the apartment. It was so quiet that even the drops of water from the sink could be heard. Naruto thought of going outside, but the last time he did, he was attacked. Jiji assured him that the guilty ones had been dealt with. Naruto couldn't feel a lie coming from his Jiji, so he trusted him. Naruto wondered if his friends would want to meet him again. A sudden knock was heard on the door, making Naruto escape his thoughts. His eyes went to the door, and he could feel that his Jiji was on the other side of the door. He stood up and walked to the door. He reached up the handle and opened the door. His Jiji was smiling at him, and he moved away to give him space. "Naruto-kun, how are you doing?" His Jiji asked, but Naruto just gave him a sad smile. The old Hokage understood and walked inside. Naruto closed the door, feeling 2 ANBU above the roof. "Did you find them?" Naruto asked, hoping his Jiji had found what his parents had left for him. He nodded his head, and from inside his cloak, he pulled out a red scroll. He slowly opened it to the table near the couch. He put his hand on the scroll, causing a poof and revealing more scrolls. Naruto smiled and quickly ran at the scrolls. He saw 2 letters, 6 scrolls, and a weird-looking kunai. His hands were slowly shaking when he grabbed the handle of the kunai. It had a yellow letter attached to the handle written to it. Naruto didn't need to be told to know whose kunai this was. His little hands shook as he looked at it. "Is your father's kunai, Naruto?" his Jiji whispered, but Naruto kept quiet. The silence took over the room as he just kept looking at it. After a few moments, he smiled and turned to look at his Gigi. I will learn Hiraishin, and I will become the Red Flash, Naruto promised with a fist on his heart. The old Hokage couldn't help but feel his heart filled with happiness. For a moment, he thought he saw Minato and Kushina standing behind Naruto with their hands on his shoulders and smiling proudly at their son. He smiled at the little Naruto and nodded his head. I have no doubt, my boy, he replied. Naruto slowly put the kunai back at the table, and his hand went to the first letter. He sighed and took all the courage he had to open it. He slowly opened it, almost afraid that he would ruin it. Dear Naruto. Oh, my sweet little child, how I wish that I were alive to see you grow into a fine young man like your father. I'm writing this letter in case something happens to us, and you're left alone. If you are reading this, it means that we are dead. We are so sorry for leaving you, baby. First things first, I love you with all my heart, Naruto. A mother never stops loving her child, even in death. Know that I am still watching over you, and another thing, don't you dare visit me unless you are 110 years old. I want you to live an entire and happy life and only die of old age. Second, if you decide to become a shinobi, remember the 3 vices of shinobi life. First is alcohol, be responsible about it, and don't become a drunk idiot. The second is money, use it responsibly and try not to waste it. If you want to waste it, better do it on your wife. The third are women, and as your mother, I absolutely forbid you to become a pervert and a womanizer. Respect women and also find a woman you love and want to spend your life with. Don't settle for anything less. One of the scrolls I left for you contains my sword, the Red Phoenix, if you ever decide to use Kenjutsu. I hope my sword will help you. The second scroll contains various jutsus of my clan. Be careful how you use them, they're all A-rank jutsus or above, use them only with the permission of Jiraiya, your godfather, Tsunade your godmother, or the old Hokage Sarutobi. The second contains the ring with which your father proposed to me, give it to the girl you believe will love you for the rest of your life. Once again, your father and I love you, no matter what. Remember that, Naruto. With love. Kushina Uzumaki. Naruto hugged the letter dearly, almost like his life depended on it, hot tears running down his cheek and falling on the floor. These were the only words he had from his mother. The person who loved him. How much Naruto would give to have her here and call him Sochi. He felt a hand on his shoulder, and his Gigi gave him a sad smile. Naruto stopped and put the letter on the table. He then picked up the second letter, which he knew was his father's letter. Dear Naruto. If you are reading this letter, then it means that I'm no longer among the living. I desperately hope that your mother is with you, but if that is not the case, let me explain a few things to you. My name is Minato Namikaze, the Yondaime Hokage. If you already know this, then you are probably in the academy. If not, it is good to read. Keep it up. If you did not know about my identity as your father before this letter, please don't be upset at Sandaime-sama. I left him specific instructions about my identity only if you were a chunin or married. I made many enemies during the Third Great Shinobi War, especially from IWA. If people were to know about it, you would be a prime target for all my enemies. I want you to know that even if you are yet to be born, I love you with all my heart. It was the happiest day of my life when your mother announced that she was pregnant with you. Since I was an orphan, I don't have any special jutsu to give you. But what I have left, I hope you master them. The improved notes I made from scratch in my quest to learn and master Naruto-sama's Hiraishin no Jutsu are in one of the scrolls I left for you. Also, I leave the Rasengan to you in hopes that you can complete it, something that I never could. It is in the second scroll. Your mother was Kushina Uzumaki of the Uzumaki clan, and she was the loveliest and one of the most compassionate women I've ever met in my life. She is perhaps the only one who loves you more than I do. When you find love, make sure she's a clever, funny, beautiful smile, gives advice when you need it, doesn't leave you alone, and is a little hot-headed. With all the love in the world. Dad. Naruto felt a loss of words. His parents truly loved him with everything they had. He thought as his parents were talking to him. He hugged both of his letters. The silence took over the room as Naruto was quiet. He slowly gathered both letters together and went to his bedroom. Naruto hid them away and returned to his room. His Gigi had stood up and had walked to the door. I will leave you alone, Naruto. I understand you will need some time with yourself, he said with a sad tone and opened the door and left. Naruto said nothing and just returned to the table where the scrolls were. There were 6 scrolls, 2 yellow ones and 4 red scrolls. He grabbed the first yellow scroll. He opened it to find text and the name at the top of the scroll. A rank, Rasengan. He read through the scroll but understood this was still very complicated for him. Naruto smiled, knowing his father had left his jutsu to him. He closed it and grabbed the second yellow scroll. S rank, Harishin. Naruto read through the scroll, and for this one, he would need to know at least level 8 of Fuinjutsu. He was happy that he wanted to learn Fuinjutsu anyway, and this gave him one more reason to learn it. Naruto closed the second scroll and opened the first red scroll. Inside it was a seal, and Naruto was sure it was his mother's sword. He opened the seal, and a sword showed up. The blade was long, the size of Naruto. The pommel of the blade was red, decorated with what looked like the wings of a bird. The scabbard was dark in color, decorated with thin red lines making it look like wings. At the top of the scabbard was the symbol of the phoenix. Naruto slowly grabbed the pommel. The material used made it feel soft on his touch. Much to Naruto's surprise, the sword wasn't heavy. He opened it a bit to see the metal, and it looked as sharp as the day it was forged. His reflection was on the blade, but Naruto could see tiny marks on the sword. He closed it and put the sword back to the scroll. I will become a master of Kenjutsu just like Yuka-chan, Naruto thought, and opened the second scroll. High A rank, fire style, Phoenix, S rank if used with Hokage level of chakra. Naruto found the jutsu very dangerous, and he wondered if he had a fire affinity to use it. S rank Uzumaki style, rainforest. Cost, 10 years lifespan. Effect, absorbs the chakra of anyone who's hit by the rain and will result in death if combined with pressure release. Naruto's eyes widened at the cost of the jutsu, and he could tell this one was dangerous. But was dangerous for the user as well. And the last scroll had danger written all over it. Naruto could feel this was not to be messed with. He slowly opened it, only for his jaw to reach the floor. SS rank Uzumaki style, water of life. Cost, medium bijou level of chakra and high chances of death. Effect, absorbs the water and chakra of everything around the user, including living things in diameter of 1 kilometer to 10 kilometers. The water and chakra gathered can be used to attack the enemy for further damage. Needed, high water affinity and high earth affinity, and sage chakra. He wondered who could use a jutsu as destructive as this one. He knew someone must have created and used it. Naruto understood no one except his Jiji and Tojiji should see these scrolls. He took the scrolls and sealed all of them in the first scroll. He took the scroll and hid it away. Naruto smiled and returned to Fuinjutsu learning. He would do his parents proud. He would bring back the Uzumaki clan. Chapter 13, Training. Naruto, after 1 week. Hokage told him yesterday that his sensei with 2 masks had returned yesterday and told him he could start training again tomorrow. Now Naruto jumped from his bed, and he quickly made some food for himself. Eggs with bread. After eating breakfast, Naruto ran to the door. He went up and out of the door, making sure to lock it up properly. He hid the key inside the potted plant near the staircase. He exited the building and ran towards the grounds. The sun was beginning to rise, so the air was still cool as it hit his face. He smiled as he increased the pace and reached the ground with 1 minute to spare. Reaching the training yard, his eyes noticed his sensei standing against a tree, reading an orange book. Naruto walked up to him, and he closed his book when he caught sight of him. He gave him an eye smile and stepped closer. Well, kid. I believe I told you one step to control your chakra is to stick a leaf on your forehead, his sensei said. Naruto nodded his head. I haven't practiced it yet. I have been busy doing level 1 seals, he replied with his hands behind his head. His sensei's widened that Naruto could do level 1 seals. Well, I will teach you how to do it, give you a few hints here and there. And my name is Kakashi Hatake. Kakashi sensei introduced himself. Naruto was sure he had heard that name before but couldn't point a finger where. Alright, kid, the first step is to take a leaf and use your chakra to stick it to your forehead like this, his sensei said, demonstrating the exercise. Naruto saw with awe as the leaf stuck on his forehead. Naruto nodded before picking up a leaf from the ground and keeping it on his forehead, and imagining his chakra creating suction at the point where the leaf touched his forehead. After a few minutes, the leaf fell to the ground. Naruto just smiled and picked up again. Kakashi was resting in the grass against a tree, reading his book and looking at Naruto. Naruto closed his eyes and tried to concentrate and focus his chakra on a single point. Surprisingly, after 8 more tries, the leaf stuck on his forehead like glue. Only 9 tries to get the amount of chakra right. The leaf quickly stuck to his forehead on the 10th try, and he stood there smiling proudly. Using chakra for the first time felt really good. He had to imagine how his chakra flowed and sort of command it to do so, and voila! Task accomplished. Kakashi smiled behind his mask to see Naruto with a leaf on his forehead, his eyes closed, but when Kakashi got closer, he noticed the leaf was soaking wet. But what caught even me by surprise was that the leaf was greener now and looked slightly more extensive, almost like it had started growing branches. Seeing this reminded him of the talk he had with Hokage-sama, the day Naruto unlocked his chakra. Kakashi looked at the sleeping form of Naruto lying on the couch of the office, his head resting on a small pillow and not making single snoring. Kakashi smiled behind his mask but then turned to his Hokage, who looked deep in thoughts. His hands clenched together and rested his chin on his hands. Smoking his pipe and just staring at the space. Kakashi knew he had the same question as he did. He cleared his throat to get his attention. Hokage-sama looked up at him, almost waiting for him to ask questions. Hokage-sama, do you know what that chakra was from Naruto? And why did the wind, grass, and trees act like that around him? Kakashi asked, but looking at the Kage's face, and he knew there was a high chance. He didn't precisely know the complete answer for himself. I'm not sure, his chakra reminds me of Hashirama-sama, but in the same different, the old Hokage answered quietly. Kakashi's eyes widened at his response. First Hokage. Is Naruto a senju? But he has red hair and has chakra chains. Kakashi touched his cheek slightly. Hokage-sama, does Naruto have senju blood? Kakashi asked respectfully and glanced at Naruto, who was still sleeping. The old Hokage moved away from his pipe and released the smoke from his mouth. His eyes looked up at Minato's picture on the wall. He took a deep breath and looked at Kakashi again. I don't know, but I just know that his chakra is similar to Hashirama-sama, Hokage replied and took a blank paper from his drawer and started writing a letter to Tsunade. Kakashi wasn't sure what to think of it but decided to ignore it for now. He had no answers for now. Naruto, you did well, Kakashi complimented him with an eye smile. But still very impressed with how fast Naruto completed his chakra control exercise. Most kids took 4 to 5 days to get this exercise right, and this kid had done it in 1 hour. Absolutely unbelievable and outright ridiculous, Kakashi thought. He thought that Naruto had gotten a lot from his sensei. Naruto noticed the way he was looking at him, and he could feel pride but a hint of sadness coming from his sensei. Sensei, why are you sad? Naruto suddenly asked, caught him unguarding. Kakashi knew from the Hokage and how Naruto always knew where they were that he was a censor, but being able to feel emotions was something he had heard that only Mito Uzumaki could do. Don't worry, Naruto, you just remind me of someone, Kakashi replied proudly at his tone. Naruto grinned. You mean I remind you of my father, he stated, and Kakashi took a step back, and his mouth and eyes widened. How? How do you know that? Kakashi asked curiously that Naruto knew about his father. The Hokage had mentioned nothing that he had told Naruto anything about his heritage. Naruto's grin grew. Furball told me, and then Jiji Hokage confirmed it, he replied. Kakashi felt a cold sweat on his forehead at the mention of the Kyuubi, but at the same time was thinking, why would the demon fox tell Naruto that? He opened his mouth to speak when Naruto raised his hand, almost knowing what he would say. I know what you want to say, and no. Kyuubi is my friend and is not trying to corrupt or manipulate me, he stated with his arms crossed in front of his chest. Kakashi was surprised to hear that answer, and he didn't expect the fox to be friends with Naruto but decided to ignore it for now. He was sure Hokage-sama knew it and was alright with it. He then remembered that Naruto knew about his parents. Naruto. Since you know about your parents, you should know that the 4th Hokage was my sensei, Kakashi said and saw Naruto open his mouth wide open and form a fist. I knew. I heard your name somewhere, Naruto said, surprising him even more. What kind of man was my father? What about my mother? Naruto asked fast and walked closer. Kakashi raised his hands in front of him. Hey, slow down. And yes, I knew your father and mother, he replied and saw Naruto smile from ear to ear, his face brightened like the sun. Do I take a lot after my parents? Naruto asked enthusiastically. I suppose you take a lot after your father, Kakashi stated. In what regards? You're a lot like him, and your personality is similar to your father, your hair is like your mother. And your face is similar to your father, Kakashi responded, smiling behind his mask. Naruto sits in the grass. He sat close to him and talked to him about his parents. After 2 hours of talking, they stood up, Naruto was smiling proudly, and Kakashi was just smiling at the little kid. Naruto decided to return to training now. Hey, Kakashi-sensei, now that I've got it, what's next? Naruto asked with a grin. At this point, he was keeping the leaf stick with only minimal concentration. Kakashi grinned. A grin that Naruto didn't like. It might mean his doom. Now, he said, taking out kunai, keep that leaf stuck and dodge these. With that, he threw the kunai at him. Naruto didn't know that Kakashi was only throwing kunai with no blade, which could hardly damage anyone. It was only his danger sense that saved him from being skewered. This continued for almost 15 minutes, and at the end of those, Naruto was heavily panting. He looked like he almost wanted to kill me, he thought, drawing deep breaths. Kakashi looked proud. Well done, Naruto. You successfully dodged the kunai and kept the leaf stuck to your forehead. Take a 5-minute break. Not many, no scratch that, no one managed that on their first try. It was starting to look like that this kid was born to be a shinobi. Kakashi contemplated if he should teach Naruto the tree walking exercise next. A relatively complex practice, a genin level. But Naruto wasn't even in the academy. Still, it doesn't hurt to try. He decided to see if Naruto was really a prodigy, and Jiraiya-sama had asked if he could take care of Naruto and train him when he was out there. After the 5-minute break was over, he called Naruto, and they both walked towards a tree. Your next exercise would be to climb this tree with only your feet, he said. Naruto gave him a quizzical look. Isn't that kind of impossible, sensei? Kakashi's eye smiled and lightly bonked him at the back of his head, with the aid of chakra. Honestly, where does your intelligence sometimes go, out of your head? Naruto rubbed the back of his head and laughed sheepishly. Kakashi then demonstrated the exercise. This is kind of similar to the leaf sticking exercise, except you are sticking yourself to a tree instead of sticking a leaf to you. If you use too little chakra, your foot won't stick. You use too much chakra, you get blasted off the tree. Begin. You can use a running start if you want. He showed him climbing the tree and throwing an actual kunai in front of him. Now I understand why trees around the training yard have scratches around, Naruto thought. Naruto as he walked to the tree and put his right foot on the bark, regulating the amount of chakra required to stick. After he got it right, he kept in mind the amount of chakra and carefully pushed the same amount in his left leg. Taking a deep breath, he lifted his left leg and put it on the bark, not losing concentration in his right leg. A huge smile appeared on his face as he successfully stuck to the bark. Tentatively, he took the next step and managed not to fall off. He continued this until he reached the top of the tree. Kakashi watched all of this with his jaw on the ground, Ika book long forgotten. There was no possible explanation for how Naruto managed to walk up the entire tree in 5 minutes of learning the exercise. Then Kakashi released a resigned sigh. I don't even want to know anymore. He thought proudly. This became the norm for everything. Naruto mastered tree walking in 4 hours, water walking in 6 hours, and spinning a kunai above his hand with his chakra in 3 days, all the while dodging Kakashi's shuriken and kunai. It was now time to give the monthly report to the Hokage. Hokage Tower. What? He asked loudly. It's true, Hokage-sama. Kakashi insisted, but with a smile not leaving his face. The smoking pipe had long since fallen off his mouth. This had to be some genjutsu. There was no way Naruto mastered all the chakra control exercises in just 5 days. Kakashi was his strongest jonin of the village, so any students he took, in this case, Naruto, had high standards to meet. But for Kakashi to say that Naruto did all of that in just 2 days, it was too much. He did not doubt that Naruto was very physically capable. Still, he had an Uzumaki heritage and, as such, had monstrous reserves of chakra that no one of his age could match. He expected Naruto to have problems controlling his chakra, not to mention the amount of chakra of Kyuubi. Still, from Kakashi's report, it looked like he had excellent control of his chakra. Kakashi then slowly asked him, knowing the Hokage was rattled to his bones by the news, Hokage-sama, can I have your permission to start teaching him ninjutsu? He asked since Naruto was still very young for taijutsu training. Yes is granted, but only easy ones for now. Tomorrow. After closing the door to his apartment, he set the thick book on the dining table and entered his bedroom, falling asleep. It was a late night after all, and sneaking around made him tired, especially after training the whole day. His alarm rang at 7 the following day. Waking up, he did his morning rituals and made himself some breakfast. That reminds me, the stock that Gigi gave me will be finished soon. I need to go shopping, he thought. After breakfast, he picked up the Fuinjutsu volume and started reading about level 1 since he needed to seal food to pass to level 2. He finished it in 4 hours, including the test his mother wrote for him at the end of the book. Fuinjutsu is so easy, and I don't understand why Gigi makes it such a big deal, he thought in confusion as he checked the answers of his test. It's not, you insane child, Kurama grumbled. He had been seeing and hearing Fuinjutsu since the Tree Huggers era, and frankly, it annoyed the hell out of him. He was much more suited to perform acts of destruction than delicate writing. And it didn't help that Naruto liked Fuinjutsu, but it surprised him since he was an Uzumaki. Naruto. What is it, furball? Naruto asked, half joking. Kurama growled at his name but then decided to ignore it since Naruto was only a little brat. It's good that you're training, but tomorrow, I would like to try and give you a bit of my chakra so that you can get used to it, Kurama replied. Naruto smiled at his friend and mentally nodded his head. Chapter 14, Broken Soul. Naruto, after 2 days. The sound of wind moving the branches of the trees relaxed him, his eyes closed as he took a deep breath. The birds were singing his favorite song, one standing on his shoulder, and his sound was on his ear. Naruto felt at peace amongst nature, and the grass was caressing his legs crossed in the ground. He could hear the water moving in the lake, and he listened to a fish jumping from the water, like wanting to show himself. A smile spread on his cheek as one more bird landed on his red hair and used his legs searching through his hair, almost thinking that his hair would be a beautiful little house to lay her eggs. Suddenly the bird flew away, as Naruto's body filled with Kurama's chakra. His nails started growing slowly, his whiskers grew, his hair looked to react from his chakra, they got spiker, his teeth slowly grew, and he looked sharper. Naruto slowly opened his eyes, but instead of blue ones, they were red like blood. Naruto felt his body grow stronger, even more than when he unlocked his chakra for the first time. He slowly stood up on his legs, and he noticed the wind was harsher now. You're doing well, Naruto. Give it 5 years, and I'm sure you can start using 1 tail worth of chakra, Kurama complimented as his chakra slowly washed away, and Naruto turned back to normal. He wished Naruto to start using a bit of his chakra if anyone stupid enough decided to harm him. But at the same time, not too much chakra since Naruto was still young. Naruto nodded his head and suddenly fell on his knees, panting. He felt exhausted after accessing that much chakra. He wished Kakashi-sensei was here, but he had gone to another mission, much to Naruto's surprise since it hadn't been a long time since he returned. Still panting, he decided to lay on the grass. He used his right arm as a pillow, and the grass touched his chin slightly. He felt relaxed again and slowly caught his breath. Kurama, you didn't tell me this would happen, Naruto accused, but his voice was half joking. Kurama smirked inside him. Well, you know what they say, no pain, no gain, Kurama replied, but feeling relaxed, he slowly closed his thinking but thought was not leaving his mind. What is this feeling? Why can Naruto have this kind of effect on the nature around him? Kurama thought, slightly angry since he thought of himself as intelligent, and not having answers wasn't something he liked, but at the same time interested. He then noticed that Naruto had fallen asleep. Kurama opened his eyes slightly to see the trees around him slowly growing, full of life. He liked it more like this, Gigi. You said we should help humans, and I think this one is worth it. I wonder if he is the one you talked to us about. Kurama asked himself and then thought about his brothers and sisters. He knew all of them were sealed like him and thought if their Jinchuriki is like his or is just some bastard who only wants their power. Naruto was sleeping quietly in the grass. 3 birds were resting on his back. They didn't look scared of him. The sun was shining, making everything brighter. A shadow slowly moved towards Naruto. You found a good place to sleep, my boy. The voice of the old Hokage was heard. He noticed that Naruto didn't react to him and was still sleeping. He wondered why he would be so tired to sleep out here. His eyes looked at the grass around him that looked to have grown, and he put a hand on his chin, wondering why. He decided to ignore it and think later about it. Hiruzen slowly kneeled and picked up Naruto gently, trying not to wake him up. He shunts away to his apartment. Opening the door, Hiruzen could see everything was in its place. Nothing was in the middle of the carpet or just stuff left around. It was clean. He smiled and saw 2 open scrolls lying on the table near the couch. He saw a wooden kunai near the scrolls. Hiruzen reached the bedroom and put him in the bed. Naruto was still sleeping, his right eye covered from his red hair. Sarutobi chuckled at seeing that his hair had already reached his eyes. He wondered if Naruto would want to cut his hair but decided to ignore it. He covered him with a sheet and left the apartment. 2 months later. The clock was ticking, and Naruto slowly opened his eyes to see that it was morning. He was feeling the sun shining through the window. He rubbed his eyes with his forearm and stood up from the bed. It had gotten colder for a week now. It was December, and the streets, houses, and everything was covered in snow. It was still only half a foot deep, but Naruto liked it nonetheless. He has trained like crazy in Fuinjutsu, chakra control, and ninjutsu in the last 2 months. 3 weeks ago, he started training in level 2. To pass level 2, he needed to make an explosive tag for a kunai, seal 2 weapons or more, and seal 3 completely different items. Naruto loved Fuinjutsu, and he would spend a lot of time reading and rereading his books about Fuinjutsu. His Jiji had given him a few points here and there. He still hasn't started training on taijutsu. Kakashi told him he could begin when he reached 5 years old. Naruto was looking forward to that, even though he knew it would be hard. When it came to ninjutsu, he could only do one so far, changing his position with a log. Naruto wondered where the log even came from. Kakashi told him he would teach him clone jutsu soon. Naruto smiled, looking at the snow, but he was most happy that Tojiji would come soon. It had been 5 months, and he couldn't wait. Not mentioning that apparently, his Tojiji was a Fuinjutsu master according to his Jiji. Naruto was surprised and couldn't wait to ask him questions about the art of Fuinjutsu. As he opened the door that led to the restroom, he suddenly felt a presence above the roof near a building close to his apartment. This usually wasn't a problem, but he couldn't feel any emotions coming from this one. Naruto felt a cold sweat running down his cheek, his heart beating on his throat. He hoped the same thing wouldn't happen again like last time when he felt the emotionless Anbu. Naruto was about to say something to Kurama when the presence disappeared. He breathed a sigh of relief and decided to train his chakra control. Keep a kunai on the tip of his finger and a leaf on his forehead. After eating breakfast, he grabbed a wooden kunai and leaf that he kept for training purposes. He put 2 kunai in the tip of his fingers and a leaf on his forehead. As he relaxed, trying to keep the balance, he remembered his shogi matched a month ago. Shikako-sama had invited him to dinner. Naruto walked alongside Shikamaru and his parents. His freshly cleaned hair blew in the wind as it dried. He had been scared when Shikamaru's mother had become so downright murderous, but she had simply had him wash and reclothed him before setting out for this Chuza's place. Honestly, Shikamaru's mother had been incredibly understanding and constantly smiled at him as they walked. It was excellent, and he found himself smiling back at her as he walked comfortably with his friend's family. Shikamaru walked lazily next to Naruto. Despite not knowing Naruto too well until recently, he still felt happy his friend was dropping that guard he seemed to have constantly. His sharp mind caught every flinch Naruto might have when he would be around Shikamaru's family. He had noticed how Naruto seemed uncomfortable with someone being so intimate as to wash him as Shikamaru's mother did, but he allowed it to happen. Now Naruto was starting to relax in her presence, as well as his father's. When they were close to Chuza's place, Naruto finally broke the comfortable silence that had been surrounding their walk. "Nah. Where are we going?" he almost shouted. His exuberance shone through to his bright blue eyes. Shikamaru's mother turned and smiled gently to him. "To a friend's place, their food is the best," she said quietly. Naruto's eyes widened. "No way. Ichiraku's ramen is the best," he said as he pointed at Shikamaru's mother accusingly. Shikamaru and his father chuckled as Yoshino's eyebrow twitched. Suddenly a shout could be heard from the compound they were now standing in front of. "Oi!" A heavy-set woman came bursting out the doors. The entire Nara family stepped back as the woman rounded on Naruto. "Who dares say my cooking is not the best in this village?" she shouted to Naruto. Naruto glared back up at the woman. "No food is better than Ichiraku's. Ramen is the food of the gods." he shouted to the now red-faced woman. The woman's eyes narrowed. We'll see if you can keep that tune after you eat my cooking. The woman said as she brought herself up to her full height, and Naruto saw that she was wearing a purple blouse with golden trimmings, a pair of black pants and heeled shoes. Her eyes had some coloring to the at the corners as she looked up at the Nara family and broke into a smile before reaching down and grabbing Naruto by the scruff of his clothes. Let the lesson begin. She shouted as she turned around and headed back into the compound. Close the door behind you, Shikamaru-kun. She yelled as Naruto got glimpses of a few doors before he was set into a seat. Naruto's mouth watered as he looked at the veritable feast in front of him. Shikamaru chuckled as he walked up behind Naruto. This is the Akimichi clan. They have some of the best restaurants in the city, Naruto. He said as he sat down next to him. Naruto was still focusing on the food as the same woman from before, and two males entered the room. Shikamaru munch, so you're the munch guest tonight, Choji said as he looked at his friend. He sat down next to him and finally noticed Naruto staring hungrily at the table. Naruto? He asked between munches. Naruto turned to look at him with drool coming out of his mouth. Choji? He asked as his eyes returned from their glazed look. His stomach gave a large growl as he hadn't eaten in a few days. Choji blinked at his stomach's growl, and the older-looking Choji laughed heartily from the head of the table, bringing the young adult's attention to how Shikamaru's parents and Choji's parents had finally joined them. I don't believe we have had introductions, have we, Naruto-san? She said quietly. Naruto smiled at her and nodded. I am Uzumaki Naruto, he said boisterously, breaking the shock of his manners. Nara Yoshino. Shikamaru's mother said as she smiled. They soon started eating. Naruto enjoyed the food, and Shikamaru was surprised to see him eat as much as Choji. Once Naruto had eaten his fill, he sat back and smiled lazily at his newest friend and whispered to him, "Thank you for inviting me over, Shikamaru." Shikamaru just nodded back at Naruto as he sat in his chair. Shikamaru's eyes darted over to Naruto, and an unusual gleam appeared in his eyes as he spoke. Would you like to play a game, Naruto? He asked. Naruto's intrigued expression was his answer. I enjoy playing shogi, I want you to play a match with me, he said to his friend. The adults and Choji had disbelieving expressions on their faces. The only person to beat Shikamaru was Shikaku. I don't know how to play, Shikamaru. Can you teach me? Naruto asked curiously. Though he had read a little about the game, he didn't know everything. He didn't want to deny playing a game with his friend, especially since he said he wanted to play with him. Practically a first for Naruto. Of course, let's see what you can do, Shikamaru replied and stood up. He walked over to Shikaku-sama. He gave him a board. Shikamaru grabbed it and opened it, and now it was the size of almost a meter length and half-meter width. Shikamaru explained the rules to him and soon started playing. Naruto understood how to play and started playing. It didn't take long to realize that Shikamaru was very good at it. Choji and Ino were looking at them. Well, Choji was. Ino didn't look that much interested. Shikaku-sama looked at them like a hawk, analyzing every move of them. Naruto felt slightly uncomfortable under his gaze but hid it well. Now there were 3 wins for Shikamaru, and Naruto put the finger on his chin. He looked up at Shikamaru determinedly. Another game, Shikamaru, he said. He nodded gladly. And I win, Naruto said, grinning from ear to ear. Shikamaru looked surprised that he lost, but even more surprised were the others, even Ino. She didn't understand the game, but even she knew that Shikamaru was good at it. Wow, Naruto, you're good at it. Naruto heard Shikaku-sama compliment him, much to his surprise since he expected him to be angry at him for winning. Shikamaru held a finger on his chin and looked at Shoki's board, almost like he was scanning and wanting to know how he lost. I never thought he would lose, said Choji. Yeah, you finally showed his lazy ass, Ino shouted and gave Naruto a warm smile. Naruto smiled back but then noticed her father glaring down at Ino. You shouldn't be so loud, Ino, her father said with a stern tone. Ino shivered and nodded her head without saying anything. Naruto chuckled under his breath and turned his eyes to Shikamaru, who was still looking at the board, almost expecting to receive an answer. He looked up at Naruto. One more game, he stated, and Naruto grinned and played one more game. They were finally done after 5 more games. It was 4 wins for Naruto and 6 wins for Shikamaru. Very good, Naruto-kun, Shikaku-sama complimented him. Ino and Choji had fallen asleep since it was very late now. Thank you, Shikaku-sama. Naruto thanked him and looked back at Shikamaru, who looked tired but still was all ears. I can't wait to play another game, Shikamaru said, and they shook their hands. Naruto escaped his thoughts when one of the kunai fell from his finger. The other was still standing, and the leaf was on his forehead. Naruto's hand moved to the leaf on his forehead when he grabbed it. Naruto was surprised to see that it looked slightly more significant, and the petiole was a dark color, almost like it was burned while the tip and margin were soaking wet, and the middle had started growing small midbrain. Naruto scratched his cheek slightly in confusion, and he didn't understand what was happening and why the leaf would react like that. I'm sure this has something to do with your affinities, Kurama suddenly talked. Naruto raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Do I have more than one affinity? Naruto asked him, and he knew what the affinities that a ninja can have. The first Hokage had strong water and earth affinity, and he could use wood style by combining them. Yes. I'm not entirely sure which one you have, but by looking at the leaf, I can safely say you have strong fire affinity and water affinity. As for the leaf growing larger, it might be because of your Senju blood, Kurama explained, and noticing that in the seal, the forest looked greener, he could swear that he was feeling wind caressing his body. Naruto raised an eyebrow. He didn't know why he would have Senju blood. The only Senju left was Tsunade Senju, and as far as anyone knew, she never had children, and no Senju ever went missing. How is that possible, Kurama? Naruto asked, interested and wondering if Jiji or Tojiji had any information about it. I don't know, but the feeling of your chakra is very similar to both Hashirama Senju and Mito Uzumaki, Kurama said. Hashirama with venom. Naruto noticed it and got even more confused. He knew Mito Uzumaki was the wife of the first Hokage, and that was the only connection he could have with Hashirama-sama. Kurama, do you hate the first Hokage? Naruto asked, but already knowing the answer since he could feel the negative emotions coming from Kurama. He growled and fully opened his eyes. Madara Uchiha might have controlled me with his damn Sharingan, but the first Hokage hunted down all my brothers and sisters and gave them to different villages like we are just mindless beast. He might have thought that he was doing good, but the only thing he did was raise the stakes of wars, causing more death, and doom the life of both the Bijou and whoever became a Jinchuriki, Kurama shouted at the end. Mostly that Naruto had a hard life. Naruto was silent during the whole conversation, and he couldn't help but agree with what Kurama said. Sealing the Bijou stopped no wars. There was the first Shinobi War, second and third wars. Naruto wondered if humanity was doomed like this. To always wage more war and more for eternity until there's nothing left. Kurama noticed the feelings of Naruto. Naruto, you don't need to think about that, you're still too young to think about the problems of this world. Perhaps you can start training your chakra control again since you will need it. Kurama spoke and silently regretting to tell Naruto about such things now. Naruto smiled and decided to do that. Later. It was 1700 hours, and Naruto was eating lunch. He didn't do anything else but stay in the house. There wasn't much point in going outside, only if he wanted hateful glares from the villagers that he was tired of. He decided to sleep early today. Naruto could hardly keep his eyes open. Walking to the bed, he was ready to lay down in the bed when he felt the presence of the emotionless man again. Naruto tried to feel the two ANBUs that usually stayed close to him, but he couldn't feel them anywhere close to him. He was ready to ask Kurama what to do when 5 Chunin-level people landed very close to his apartment. Naruto turned to look at his bedroom window and opened it. After opening it, he turned back and hid under the bed. He heard the door of his apartment burst open. Demon, one of them shouted with venom in his tone. Naruto felt his heart beating so much that felt that would come out of his chest, cold sweat running through his forehead. The cold wind from outside, making his nose and ears feel like they would fall off. He could hear them checking everywhere around his house when the door of the bedroom burst open. Naruto kept quiet and could feel the ki of the man in his room. The air felt cold as ice, and Naruto tried very hard not to let his body shiver and make noises. The windows open. He must have run outside. Naruto heard a shout inside his room. He still kept quiet, and he heard footsteps going away. He could feel they were still very close to his house despite being outside. But the only problem was that the emotionless ANBU was still in the same place and hadn't moved. Before Naruto could think of anything, the 5 men that left suddenly returned inside his house. Naruto's eyes widened, and his little body started shaking like a leaf. Demon, a cry was heard inside his house. Naruto felt cold tears in his eyes, and he didn't know why no ANBU was around. Suddenly he felt someone grabbing his foot and pulling him out from under the bed. Naruto screamed in horror when he felt a punch on his stomach. His whole air left him, and he fell to the floor. Naruto tried to catch his breath. He was putting his hands on his stomach. "There you are, demon child," the man shouted and grabbed him by his hair. Naruto tried to move his hands away, but he was no match to a Chunin. He opened his eyes to see this man in front of him had dark hair. He was smiling viciously to him. Naruto tried to punch and kick him when he threw him outside through the window. Naruto felt pain everywhere. He stood up and tried to run away. He could feel a mob of villagers very close to him. "Catch the demon. You won't run away this time. Kill him." People shouted different things, and he could hear their footsteps running towards him. Despite wearing only a shirt and a pair of pants, and that the ground was covered in snow, and it was snowing, Naruto didn't feel cold. On the opposite, he felt warm, almost like a fire inside him. Suddenly his eyes turned blood red, his nails grew, and his whiskers looked more on his face. "Run, Naruto," Kurama yelled. Naruto felt a surge of power inside him and ran away with all his strength. He ran to his right and then to his right again. He remembered this way was where Shikamaru's house was. He was sure he would be safe if he could get there. But suddenly, the emotionless Anbu moved and landed right in front of him, punching him in the face and throwing him against the wall. Naruto growled at the strange man and tried to run away when he felt a sharp pain in his hand. "Aha!" Naruto screamed. He saw a kunai on his right palm. Blood coming out of the wound. He gritted his teeth almost to the point of breaking. The mob reached him. If that wasn't enough, Naruto could feel 5 shinobi amongst them. The Anbu had immediately left. Naruto could feel the gaze of hatred in both ways. Tears fell freely from his red eyes. "Look at the demon, like a rat in the mousetrap," one of them shouted and walked closer. Kurama inside felt furious at the stupid people. "I'm not a demon," Naruto yelled, his voice sounding demonic. The mob flinched by his tone, but they quickly started walking towards him. One of them reached him. "This will be fun, child," he whispered the last part before he punched him in the gut. Naruto gasped for air, and his right hand wasn't moving. He could hardly feel anything from it. Naruto closed his eyes. "Tojiji, where are you? Tu-chan, please help me. Ka-chan, please," Naruto begged as he felt punch after punch to his body. Soon he was lying on the cold ground, blood coming out of his nose, ears, and mouth. His right palm had stopped bleeding, and he felt no pain, his whole body felt numb. Kurama was trying to heal him when one of them pulled out a kunai. "This is your end," he shouted and went to stab him in the neck when everything went dark. Naruto couldn't see anything that happened next, but he could have sworn he heard the sound of wood piercing flesh and the screams of agony. Chapter 15, 7 Tails. Hokage Tower. Hearing the council complaining about nothing at all was slowly driving him mad. He couldn't understand why he was even here. Why was he needed? Sarutobi thought they wanted to hurt Naruto, but he knew too trustworthy Anbu was watching him. He knew they wouldn't let him out of sight, and he was safe. He pinched the bridge on his nose, his eyes roamed around the council room and stopped at his old friend, Danzo. They both were old shinobi, good at hiding their emotions, but Sarutobi could tell that something was up. Just the way the edge of his lips was slightly upwards worried him. He remembered that Naruto told him about the emotionless Anbu spying on him when the first attack happened. Hiruzen hoped his eyes were playing tricks with him, but he couldn't help but have a bad feeling on his gut that something was up with this council meeting. Kakashi was away in an S-rank mission, leaving Bear and Cat to protect Naruto if needed. Sarutobi had received a letter from Jiraiya informing him that he would arrive soon. He hoped he had answers for Naruto's chakra. He had read a few scrolls and books and found no answers, not good enough answers. He remembered and heard from Tobirama-sensei that nature itself looked to react from Hashirama's mood and his chakra. That was proof enough for Sarutobi to believe that Naruto had Senju blood, but the question remained, how? And Hiruzen found no answers. He glanced at the photo of Minato hanging on the wall. The old Hokage wondered if his successor had any secrets that he didn't want anyone else to know. Thinking about Minato made him remember how Naruto felt if he was happy here. The old Hokage was no fool, and he knew his surrogate grandson wasn't happy. No, he needs a family, but who can give him that? Minato, what would you think about the village you gave your life for? What would you feel about the way they treat your son? Sarutobi asked himself and decided to ignore it. For now, he put that question at the back of his head and focused on the pointless council. "Hokage-sama?" One of the civil council members asked, looking at the Hokage. Sarutobi narrowed his eyes at his tone, leaking his ki, showing who was in charge here. The man looked to get the message as he put his hand on his chest and tried to catch his breath. His color was gone from his face. White as milk, and his hands shaking. Yes, Hokage replied quietly, his hands clenched together in front of him. Another man close to him suddenly stood up. What he wanted to ask was, what will we do with the demon? The man asked with a disgraceful tone. The old Hokage closed his eyes, his hands clenched tightly, and his shadow looked to grow behind him, his eyes couldn't be seen. Next time you refer to Naruto like that, will be the last time you talk, Hokage promised. The air became cold for everyone in the room. Even Danzo was sweating slightly from his forehead. The man fell back on his seat, his face white as snow, his mouth hanging open. The old Hokage glanced at everyone around the council room to see if anyone wanted to sleep. The silence grew in the room. Sarutobi moved away from his pipe and decided to move to the next topic. Anything else? He asked, wanting to end this pointless meeting. A few moments of silence followed, and even the clan heads started looking at the civil council. One of them moved his elbow to one close to him. The man looked to wake up and opened his mouth to talk when everyone suddenly felt a surge of power, and it came from outside. Every ninja in the room stood up, looking at the windows when the power stopped. It disappeared as fast as it appeared despite feeling it only for a short moment. The old Hokage recognized Naruto's chakra. Without a second thought, he moved his fingers, and 3 ANBU showed up. With me, he ordered and left through the window in a hurry. Please be safe, Naruto, the old Hokage thought. Jumping from roof to roof, they reached a hallway that was close to Naruto's apartment. Sarutobi felt his heart beating in his throat, the smell of blood was in the air. The old Hokage knew that smell way too well. The thought that the smell came from Naruto frightened him. They were jumping down. His eye was met with a view that came out from a war battle. Blood was dropping in the ground from the corpses that were torn apart and hanging in the air. The blood was streaming down the halfway like a small lake. Sarutobi saw wood piercing through their flesh and bones. Guts falling on the floor, making a terrifying sound. Snow was red, some of the villagers had their faces split open, from wood piercing them behind their heads and splitting their faces, skin hanging from limbs to limbs. Wood looked to have grown inside some of them and come out from different parts of their bodies. Sarutobi looked at some of them that looked like branches of a tree coming out of their bodies. All their eyes showed fear and terror, their mouth left open, screaming until death embraced them. Sarutobi closed his eyes, snow falling on his hat. He opened them again and ignored the carnage in front of him. He didn't count them, but he knew they were at least around 30 bodies lying around. Slowly moving to the end of the hallway, he was met with even brutal sight. Naruto lying on the ground, covered everywhere in blood. Without thinking twice, he rushed at the young boy, touching his neck and looking at his chest still moving up and down made him sigh in relief. The old Hokage moved him in his hands, his little body like a glass that could easily break. Guilty and sadness filled his heart. He had failed Minato, he had failed Jiraiya, the second and first Hokage, but most importantly, he failed Naruto. Anbu Hiruzen screamed, and they kneeled in front of him. He turned to them, still holding the little boy in his hands. Send him to hospital, if they give you crap, arrest them and send them to Ibiki, he ordered. Quickly grabbing Naruto, they moved away, leaving him alone in his guilty. The old Hokage looked down at the snow covered in blood, a part of a body fell in the ground, but Sarutobi didn't bother to look who it was. His eyes slowly looked up, looking at the trees that had grown, they made the symbol of a spiral, the bodies still hanging, like tree decorations. He took a deep breath and decided to deal with whoever had organized this. Naruto. He felt his body floating in the space, his whole body feeling numb. Water covered his body lying on his back on the cold floor. The water almost reached his nose. His eyes opened beneath the water. Usually, he felt at peace around nature, but now, he felt cold, the water felt cold on his skin and clothes. The air itself felt cold. Naruto could feel Kurama's gaze looking down at him, and he could feel his sadness and worries. Why am I still here? To suffer? Naruto asked himself. He tried very hard to close his eyes and tell himself that it was all a dream, but he could still feel the pain and hear their screams. Closing his eyes, visions of their blood falling in the frozen ground like a waterfall was in front of him. Naruto wanted to believe all this was a dream, and like any other dream, he would eventually wake up. Tusan. Is this the village you protected? This village you gave your life for? Did you, you? No. This. Naruto asked himself, his blue eyes gone. Instead, they were red like blood on my hands. Naruto, Kurama called him, concerned about his well-being. Naruto slowly raised his body, his eyes looking at the giant fox behind the cage. The trees weren't green anymore, their leaves turned brown. He was falling softly on the floor covered in water. Naruto went to his friend. Why do people do this to me? Naruto asked, his voice tiny and breaking. Tears on his eyes. Kurama wasn't sure how to answer. Looking at Naruto, he leaned his head closer to the bars. People in the village feel grief, and they want to blame someone for their loved ones. I'm not around to blame, but they know. I'm sealed inside you, so they blame you. Humans always want to blame someone. Forgiveness and blaming yourself for your problems are not attributed that humans are known for. Kurama replied, sure that Naruto wouldn't understand it. He was still only a little boy. Naruto heard his answer and kept quiet, his eyes looking at Kurama's red eyes. After a few moments of silence, he stood up on his legs and walked towards his friend. The water felt heavy on his legs, and then he stood in front of the cage. He raised his hands, not shaking despite being close to the Kyuubi, the strongest demon in the world. To Naruto, he was a friend, and his hand softly touched his fur. Thank you for being here, Kurama, Naruto replied with a smile on his face. Kurama grinned and felt the positive feeling of Naruto slowly coming back, and the trees looked to be returned to their old self. Always Naruto, Kurama replied happily, and he could swear he saw his father standing behind Naruto with a smile on his face. His red hair reminded him of the time when things weren't as bad. He reminded Kurama of Roku as well. Are you the one? After 3 days, hospital. Lying on the hospital bed was Naruto, his red hair covering most of his face. The old Hokage was sitting close to him. His eyes looked down at the little boy with spiky red hair. Sarutobi knew Jiraiya would give him hell for what happened to Naruto, and he couldn't really blame him. No, he blamed himself. The two ANBUs that were supposed to protect Naruto had reported that a fight had started close to them. They had left to deal with it. When they had returned, finding the Hokage looking at what was left of the mob that had attacked Naruto. Sarutobi hadn't told anyone about Naruto using wood style, and they didn't need to know. Returning to the council meeting, he had ordered the whole civil council to be sent to Ibiki for questioning, much to the surprise of everyone else in the council. Shikaku was quick to put 2 and 2 together and had immediately asked if Naruto was alright. It broke his heart to say that Naruto had been beaten by a group of idiots that couldn't tell the difference between water and glass that holds the water. The wood in the hallway had been quickly burned to disappear any evidence that wood style was used. The bodies had been buried despite deserving to be left to rot. Hokage knew Kakashi would as well return soon from his mission, and he didn't know how to tell him that a mob had beaten up Naruto. I have failed. Suddenly the window was opened. The old Hokage didn't bother to see who it was. The air suddenly felt much colder, and a shadow stood close to the old Hokage looking at the little boy lying on the floor. Who did this? Jiraiya shouted, slamming his hand on the table close to his sensei. The old Hokage turned and glared at his student. Jiraiya always looked happy, it was hard to piss him off, but now he looked more pissed than when Orochimaru had left the village. Sarutobi put the finger on his lips to tell him to be quiet, and he moved his head in a gesture to follow him. He followed and reached the Hokage office. Reaching it, he put a silence seal and told his ANBU to leave them alone. He turned to his only student, who still worked for the village. His body was leaning against the wall waiting for him to explain. 3 days ago, a mob attacked Naruto. I was busy in a damn meeting, and the ANBUs that were supposed to protect him were dealing with a fight that had occurred between civil and shinobis. When I reached Naruto, everyone from the mob was dead. Death by wood, Hiruzen explained and waited for the furious shouts to come, but instead, he was met with silence. Jiraiya just stood there and looked to be thinking about what he had just said. After a minute of absolute silence, he moved away from the wall and turned to look at his old sensei. I'm taking Naruto with me to train then, Jiraiya stated, with a tone that he was saying a simple truth that would happen no matter if he liked it or not. Hiruzen wasn't surprised to hear that. He grabbed his pipe and smoked from it, trying to ease the pain on his head. He glanced at Minato's picture before looking at Jiraiya again. Removing the pipe from his mouth, he cleared his throat to speak. You said it was dangerous, old Hokage reminded him. That would be, but where I'm taking him, no one would be there to cause him to harm or even spy on him. Old Hokage's eyes widened, understanding where he meant. Pinching the bridge on his nose. How long? Hiruzen asked, wanting to know how long Naruto would be away from the village. 4 years. What about the academy? Hiruzen asked, thinking that Naruto could spend more time with his friends once he started the academy. Once he returns, you can put him in the class he was supposed to be if he never left, Jiraiya stated. Closing his eyes, he remembered Naruto lying with blood covering his whole body. Is granted. Ashera Uzumaki. The sound of the sword hitting wood could be heard throughout the forest. She moved her hands again and slashed the tree in half. The tree fell to the ground. The tree was still young but still was an achievement. Sweat covered her face, breathing heavily, trying to catch her breath. She decided to lay down on the grass and rest, and her purple eyes looked downwards at the seal on her wrist. The seal was a red color and had appeared when her mother had died. Her thoughts went to her mother and father. She knew what had happened to her father, and her mother was buried close to a tree. Her red hair reached to her shoulders, her small sword tightened behind her back. A symbol of phoenix was on the pommel of the blade, a yellow bird spreading his wings, beneath surrounded by flames. It had been months, Asha wasn't sure how many since the hidden village of Taki had found her. The town was full of waterfalls, even the air itself looked to have tiny drops of water in the air. The leader of the group was Lord Shibuki. A young man with black eyes and long, dark brown hair going just behind his neck wore gray pants and a green shirt. The village was built around a lake, and the water was very relaxing. Some village women would sometimes wash in a hidden lake away from their eyes. Asha hasn't bathed in any lake yet, but that wasn't important to her right now. The leader had told her she could stay here as long as she wished. Ashera had eagerly accepted. She lived in a small house in the village, with only 2 rooms. The restroom and bedroom were in the same room. The toilet was in the second room. It wasn't the best house, but Asha didn't complain. She made sure to visit her mother's grave every day, tell her how she had been. The ANBU that followed had disappeared. Their bodies were burned when they died, leaving no evidence of which village they were. Asha didn't know, but she promised herself to take revenge on whoever ruined her life, and killed her family. Asha had started studying shinobi stuff the 3rd day she had arrived, mostly on seals. Sadly Taki had no seal master, and the last one had died 2 years ago. Walking back to the center of the village, Asha was heading to her home and glancing at the seal on her wrist. The seal looked like a spiral, with an empty circle in the center, with a small flaming circle surrounding the seal. She didn't know what the seal meant. Deciding to ignore it and think later about it, she heard a sound coming from a store. Get out and stay out, I've told you before, you're driving the customers away. A shout was heard from a nearby store. A girl ran away from the store. She had green hair. Asha looked around her, noticing the disgusted look of everyone around. She wondered what their problem was. She had seen the girl before but didn't have a chance to talk to her, deciding to follow her. She ran after her. Soon she reached a big tree that was in the center of the village. The tree looked almost 3 times the size of a typical tree. The branches looked big enough to be a tree on itself. Much to her surprise, insects were flying around the leaves. But her eyes quickly stopped to a treehouse. A smile slowly spread on her face, and the house looked exactly like the treehouse she had before. Hell was even more significant than hers. Asha decided to look at it more closely. She walked up to the treehouse to find the girl lying on the floor of the house. Her hands clenched together in front of her chest, her eyes looking at something in her hands. Deciding to reveal herself, she cleared her throat, making the girl stand up immediately and turn to her. She had spiky mint green hair, tan skin, and wore a short white shirt that showed her midriff with a white miniskirt with bandages on her legs and under her shirt and white armlets, wearing blue shinobi sandals. Asha could tell the girl was scared of her, her eyes looking at her terrified. Don't worry, and I won't hurt you. I'm a friend, Asha said, trying to ease the tension between them. Her eyes widened at her words. A smile spread on her face. Friend? She asked with a small voice. Asha nodded her head. Yes, and my name is Ashera, you can call me Asha. Databane. She introduced herself with an open hand in front of her chest. My name is Fu, friend Ashera. Chapter 16, Mount Myoboku. Naruto. Opening his eyes, he was met with light shining on his face. Everything seemed blurred. Naruto quickly put his hands in front of his eyes to see clearly. His blue eyes roamed around, noticing that he was in a weird room. The walls were brown and weren't vertical like they usually are. The walls looked almost bent, making Naruto wonder how this house even worked. He could smell the scent of something boiling inside his room. His eyes went to a pot that looked made of something of dark color, beneath fire burning boiling whatever inside. The smell came from it, and Naruto wondered what was inside. His eyes turned back to the open window where the light of the sun came from. It wasn't a window, more like a hole in the wall. He slowly stood up and looked outside to see the bright blue sky, which put a smile on his face, but he immediately noticed that he wasn't in the hidden leaf here. The grass and ground were the same. He could see a weird tree that looked like big leaves raising from the ground. In the tip of them was a small hole and water came out, falling in the lake. Naruto wondered where he was, but he couldn't shake the weird calm and relaxing feeling he was getting from this place. His eyes then turned to look at some giant toad statues. He slightly scratched his cheek, wondering what kind of place was this. He closed his eyes but couldn't feel anyone around. The door opened, and Naruto to see a toad looking at him. For a moment, he just looked at him and closed his eyes tightly, thinking this was some weird dream. "You woke up, Naruto boy," the toad spoke, much to Naruto's surprise. His eyes widened. Talking with Kurama made the situation less weird, but still, he didn't know who was this toad. He noticed the toad was wearing tiny clothes. Finally finding his voice to talk, his blue eyes turned to look at the toad's yellow ones. "Who are you?" Naruto asked the toad. "Oh, Jiraiya boy hasn't talked about us. My name is Fukasaku," the toad introduced himself. Naruto's understood who the toad was. His godfather had told him that he had the toad summoning contract. But at the same time, wondering where Tojiji was, why he wasn't here, and where even he was in the first place. Noticing the hesitation, "You don't need to be afraid. And Jiraiya will come soon, he was even the one who brought you here," he explained, and Naruto nodded his head in understanding. "Kurama? You there?" Naruto asked, wanting to know if Furball was asleep. "Right here. Where else would I be?" Kurama asked with an open eye looking tired. "Oh, okay, just wanted to know if you were awake," Naruto replied mentally and turned his eyes to Fukasaku, who was looking at the pot cooking something. He turned to look at Naruto. "How about something to eat?" "Until Jiraiya boy comes here," Fukasaku suggested, and Naruto nodded hungrily. "Yes, Fukasaku-sama," Naruto replied respectfully and kneeled in front of the toad who was smiling at him. Naruto could see the same smile he saw from Tojiji, Hokage-jiji, and Tuchan. But Naruto wondered why he couldn't feel the toad. He could feel the emotions but not the chakra inside him, making him wonder if the toad even had chakra or maybe a different kind. "Naruto, he's using sage chakra, you can't feel him," Kurama replied inside his head, now fully awake. "Sage chakra, what's that?" Naruto asked, interested in what that meant. "Is chakra from nature itself, you will be able to feel his chakra only when you can use sage chakra as well," Kurama replied. Naruto nodded in understanding and felt something touching his shoulder. Escaping his thoughts, he saw Fukasaku touching him with a cane. "You zoomed out, okay my boy?" he asked worriedly. Naruto just nodded his head. "I'm alright, just a talk with Kurama," he replied and saw his eyes widen slightly. "So he does talk to you?" "I have to say when Jiraiya told me you were friends with him, I didn't really believe it," he replied with a slight chuckle at the end. Naruto narrowed his eyes slightly, and his blue eyes turned like ice. "Why is that?" "Kurama is a good friend," he replied, not liking talking wrong about him. "I didn't mean anything, I just found it surprising." "That's all," he replied and grabbed a bowl for both of him and Naruto. The redhead smiled at his response and saw Fukasaku fill the bowl for him and one for himself. He handed it to him. Naruto looked down to see that it was soup, with a small thing that looked like a sausage but more white than usual. There were a few fruits around. "We don't usually eat this dish but I know you wouldn't like what we usually eat so Shima made it for you," he said and started eating the dish. Naruto wondered what was the usual dish but decided to eat for now before it got cold. While eating, Naruto couldn't help but remember the screams of the people he killed. The trees tearing them apart, he knew it wasn't his fault. He was protecting himself from stupid people but still couldn't help but feel guilty for what he did. Naruto felt like a huge weight was on his shoulders and was getting heavier each day. Naruto stopped eating and looked at his right hand. He still could feel it. Before the bad shinobi went to cut his throat, his right hand had touched the ground, and his chakra had gone to his right hand, and the trees grew and killed everyone nearby. Demon, you're a demon. You child of sin, why can't you just die? Die, demon. Kill him. You took my family away. Naruto felt hot tears on his cheek. The hateful glares, the words, the hatred. Now the beating was too much for him. What has he done to deserve any of this? Naruto understood the village would never see him as anything but a demon who took away their family. Who killed them without mercy? Die. Just die, demon. You killed my father. You heard the fourth is dead because of him. Your parents abandoned you, demon. No, that's not true. They loved me, ha 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 ha. Who would ever love you, demon? Naruto. He opened his eyes and turned to see his Tojiji standing in front of the door leaning against the wall. More tears rolled down his cheek, and Naruto jumped like an arrow to him. He hugged him and cried his heart out. Jiraiya looked down at his grandson in all but blood, and it broke his heart to see him in pain. These were times when he wished that Minato had sealed Kyuubi to someone else. He knew it wouldn't be fair, it was selfish, and Minato had a big heart to do something like that. But looking at Naruto, "I'm here, my boy, just let it out," he said quietly and rubbed his red hair. Naruto kept crying for an hour against his chest. Kurama talked to him, trying to ease his pain. Naruto stopped and slowly looked up at his Tojiji and opened his mouth to speak, and his mouth felt dry like a desert. He was happy to see him again. Naruto hoped he would stay longer with him and not leave him alone. "I know what you want to say, and isn't your fault. What they did is on them, not you." "Never you." Jiraiya started rubbing his hair with his right hand. That seemed to calm Naruto, who nodded his head. After minutes of silence, the redhead turned to look at Fukasaku again. "Where am I?" Naruto asked quietly. "You're in Mount Myoboku, the place of the toads," Fukasaku said and walked towards the door. Naruto glanced at Tojiji, and he gave him a reassuring nod. He made a small smile and followed him outside. Looking outside now, the place looked larger than inside the little house. Naruto could see a waterfall further away. The ground was covered with weird plants he had never seen before. Their pungent smell of blue and yellow flowers rode the air as he ran his fingers through them in wonder and marvelous. A genuine smile slowly spread on Naruto's face, looking at the beautiful sights in front of him. Jiraiya smiled, seeing his grandson happy. Fukasaku moved in front of Naruto, looking up at him. "Do you want to stay here, Naruto boy?" he asked. Naruto raised an eyebrow, not really understanding, and he thought he was supposed to stay in the Hidden Leaf Village. He knew the toads had their contract with the Hidden Leaf Village, but still, and not to mention he was a Jinchuriki. Understanding the confusion in Naruto's face, Jiraiya put a hand on his shoulder, and Naruto turned to look at him. "Listen, Naruto, Hokage has permitted you to stay here for 4 years to train. I will be here with you as long as I can stay. You can stay here until you feel ready to leave," Jiraiya informed him. His smile like that of Tuchan on his face, that smile warmed Naruto's heart to no end. "Stay here? This place is much better than the place that hates me," Naruto thought, but then he remembered his only friends. Shikamaru, Choji and Ino. He wondered if they would feel betrayed for not visiting them. "What about my friends?" Naruto asked with a tiny tone. "You can stay here for 4 years and then meet with them again at the academy. They already know you won't be around for some time because of their parents," Jiraiya replied, rubbing his red hair that looked to be shining under the light of the sun. Naruto looked downwards and wondered. He could feel his Tojiji wasn't lying. His mind then went to the academy, and a smile appeared on his face. A place where he could make even more friends. Naruto knew he would eventually meet them again, and the thought of Hidden Leaf Village reminded him of the people inside it. He would meet them again and would return a strong shinobi. He looked up at Tojiji and nodded his head in confirmation. Jiraiya smiled and so did Fukasaku. Hearing that answer, he took a small paper note out of his pouch and handed it to Naruto, who had a confused look on his face. "What? A piece of paper?" Naruto asked, not understanding what he was supposed to do with it. "That is not an ordinary piece of paper, it is a paper made from a special type of tree, which is grown and fed with chakra. They are used in products that react to even the slightest hint of chakra in any number of ways, depending on the nature latent in the chakra. This allows a person to know what nature affinity they have." Jiraiya explained, wanting to know Naruto's chakra affinity. Naruto nodded in understanding. "Good, just so you know, all you have to do is place your hand on the paper and channel a bit of your chakra to it and it will react to whatever affinity you have, so if you have an affinity to fire the paper will ignite and turn to ash. If you have an affinity to water, the paper will become damp. If you have an affinity to earth, it will turn to dirt. If you have an affinity to lightning, the paper will crumple up, and if you have an affinity to wine, the paper will split in two, explained Jiraiya. Naruto nodded his head as he already understood it all and then channeled a small bit of his chakra into the paper. But what happened next surprised everyone, including Naruto. Instead of cutting into two pieces as Jiraiya thought, the paper was cut into three parts as it fell to the ground, where the first one turned to dirt, causing the grass close to turning to dirt, the second became damp, and grass became wet. The third turned to ash, causing even the grass close to burning slightly. This showed that Naruto had 4 natural nature affinities, one for earth, one for water, one for wind, and one for fire. Even Fukasaku was shocked by what he saw. It wasn't that someone had 4 affinities every day but not just normal ones. He noticed the grass and knew Naruto had a high affinity for fire, water and earth, and average wind affinity. At least for now. On the other hand, Jiraiya expected wind, earth, and water because of his wood style and wind because of Minato, but the fire was probably from Kushina. But she had average fire affinity, not high ones. Naruto looked downwards at the grass and wondered. He was confused while Kurama inside was smirking from ear to ear. Naruto could feel his happiness and wonder, why? He was about to ask why when his Tojiji talked to him. This is a surprise, but a welcome one. Now since you have 4 different affinities, we can start training you once you finish your chakra control training, Jiraiya stated, then put a hand on Naruto's shoulder. Naruto noticed and could feel the seriousness of his face. Naruto, what you did to stop the mob was wood style, the ability of Hashirama Senju. While you're here you can train and talk about it with the toads, but when you return to the village, I want you to keep it a secret, Jiraiya stated with seriousness, but at the same time wondering how he could get in contact with Tsunade. She will need to know about Naruto and probably reveal some secrets. Naruto nodded his head in understanding with a big bright smile on his face. Jiraiya smiled back and couldn't help but think about Minato. He wondered if he had secrets that no one knew about. Jiraiya didn't know and decided to keep it a secret for now. Well, now let's take a walk around, Naruto boy, Fukasaku-sama suggested, and Naruto followed him eagerly since he liked the place around. Jiraiya watched them walk ahead and wondered if Naruto still wanted to become Hokage or did he have any other dream. Jiraiya wasn't sure, but whatever it was, he would always have his support. Ashera Uzumaki. The girl named Fu introduced herself with a big smile on her face. To Asha, she looked normal and wondered why the village would hate her. Is this your house? Asha asked, pointing at the house and wanting to start a conversation. Fu smiled and nodded her head, but Asha could see a hint of sadness behind her eyes. Yes, Asha, this is my home. Lord Shibuki made it for me, is nice and quiet here, she replied smiling and turning her head to her left. Asha turned to where Fu was looking to see a waterfall a bit further away. It looked beautiful. Asha could hear the sound of the waterfall could be heard, the sound of water moving was calming her. Fu, what about your parents, where are they? Asha asked but hoping she wouldn't receive the answer she thought she would. Fu's gaze lowered, and she looked at a fly close to her foot. My father died in a mission, and my mum She died too. Years ago, she answered, her voice breaking. Asha moved closer and put a hand on her shoulder. I understand, my mum and dad died protecting me. I miss them every day, Asha said quietly, trying to ease her pain. Fuz widened, and looked at her surprised, but kept quiet. After minutes of silence, Asha pulled away and decided to ask something that was bugging her. Fu, if you don't mind me asking, why did the villagers look at you like that? Ashera asked quietly. Fu felt a shiver of fear in her body. Her right hand touched the ring finger of her left hand. Her friend didn't know about her condition, and she was sure the moment she would reveal it, Asha would leave her alone as well. I hold the 7 tails, Chome, she replied and closed her eyes tightly, waiting for the shouts and the insults to come but heard nothing. Fu slowly opened her eyes to look at her right to see Asha still standing there with a raised eyebrow. So, what? She asked, still not understanding what the problem was. Ashera knew how the seal worked. And having something sealed inside you didn't make you the beast itself. Fu's eyes widened at her question, and she was sure she had heard her wrong. Yo, you mean you don't have problems with that? She asked fearfully, still afraid that Asha would look at her with the same hateful eyes. Ashera just shrugged her shoulders. That doesn't change anything, That Doshi was interrupted mid-sentence when Fu jumped and hugged her tightly and smiled from ear to ear. We are friends, she shouted happily. Asha smiled and hugged her back. Fu was crying tears of joy. Pulling away, Ashera caught her breath from her bear-like hug. Yes, we are friends, Databane, she replied, smiling and wondering if there was any Uzumaki around. She was sure there must be others from her clan, and she wasn't alone. Fu, would you like to train? She asked, and Fu immediately nodded her head in agreement. While this was happening, Chomei was awake and wondered who this girl that had no problems with Jinchuriki was. At first, wondered if the girl was a Jinchuriki but couldn't feel any of her brothers or sisters inside her. She understood this girl Ashera had a big heart and just didn't care. Now Fu, you can finally have a friend, Chomei thought. That's it for part 2. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.